3 months. That's how long the Empire had existed, and already the galaxy barely remembered what the Republic had been. Palpatine's transformation had been swift and absolute, the Senate reduced to a ceremonial body, clone armies rebranded as Imperial forces, and a new symbol flying over every capital world, the stark, aggressive crest of the Galactic Empire. The Jedi were declared traitors. Holonet broadcasts showed evidence of their attempted coup, carefully edited recordings that painted them as power-hungry zealots who'd manipulated the Republic for generations. Bounties were posted. Inquisitors, dark side users trained specifically to hunt Force sensitives, prowled the Outer Rim. And the citizens of the galaxy, exhausted by 3 years of war, largely accepted the new order. After all, the Empire promised peace. Aboard the Andromeda Ascendant, Dylan Hunt studied tactical displays that showed a galaxy transforming in real time. Red zones expanded daily, Imperial consolidation spreading like a virus through previously independent systems. The few green markers indicating resistance-friendly territories were scattered, isolated, vulnerable. Status report, Dylan said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of 3 months spent in constant motion, never staying in one system longer than 48 hours, always one step ahead of Imperial pursuit. Andromeda's avatar materialized beside him, her holographic form showing subtle stress indicators that only someone who'd known her for centuries would recognize. We've successfully evacuated 17 Jedi survivors in the past week, bringing our total to 43 Jedi rescued since Order 66. Harper's established secure communication networks on 12 systems. Bika's hyperspace route library now includes 47 Imperial patrol patterns we can exploit. And our fuel situation? Concerning, Andromeda admitted. The Andromeda was designed for Commonwealth refueling infrastructure that doesn't exist here. We're adapting local fuel sources, but the conversion efficiency is only 73%. At current consumption rates, we have enough reserves for approximately 6 more months of sustained operations before we'll need to establish a permanent refueling base. Dylan nodded grimly. The Andromeda was powerful, but it wasn't infinite. Every rescue mission, every Imperial engagement, every hyperspace jump consumed resources they couldn't easily replace. They were running a resistance on borrowed time. Captain, incoming communication, Harper's voice cut through the bridge speakers. Encrypted, using the protocols we gave to Master Kenobi. It's from Alderaan. Put it through. Bail Organa's face appeared on the main view screen, the senator's normally composed features showing strain. Behind him, the elegant architecture of Alderaan's royal palace suggested safety, but Dylan knew better, even core worlds weren't truly safe anymore. Captain Hunt, we have a situation. The Empire is moving against the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk. They're calling it pacification operations, but our intelligence suggests they're planning to enslave the entire population for labor on Imperial construction projects. Master Yoda believes several Jedi survivors are hiding there, including a Wookiee Jedi named Gungi. If the Empire takes Kashyyyk, those Jedi die, and the Wookiees become the Empire's first major enslaved species, Dylan finished. Establishing precedent for how the Empire treats non-human populations that resist. How long do we have? Imperial fleet arrives in 36 hours. It's a significant force, 3 Star Destroyers, support vessels, and a full legion of clone, Bail corrected himself, Imperial troops. Captain, I know you've been avoiding large-scale engagements, but if we don't intervene, we send a message that the Empire can do whatever it wants to whoever it wants, Dylan said. He turned to Andromeda. Rami, tactical assessment. Can we defend Kashyyyk against 3 Star Destroyers? Defensively, yes. Our weapons and shields are superior. But Captain, defending a planet requires more than winning a space battle. We'd need to prevent orbital bombardment, protect population centers, and counter ground forces, all while the Empire could simply call in reinforcements. Then we don't fight defensively, Dylan said, his tactical mind already calculating vectors and timing. We fight smart. Senator Organa, tell Master Yoda we're moving on Kashyyyk. But we're not just defending the planet, we're turning it into a demonstration of what happens when the Empire picks a fight with the wrong targets. The Andromeda dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kashyyyk system 20 hours before the Imperial fleet was scheduled to arrive. The Wookiee homeworld hung in space like a green jewel. A planet covered in massive Roshar trees that reached kilometers into the atmosphere, home to a warrior culture that had fought beside the Republic during the Clone Wars. Now, those same warriors prepared to defend their homes against the government they'd once served. Dylan stood on the observation deck with Master Yoda, watching Kashyyyk grow larger on the view screen. The ancient Jedi Master had been aboard the Andromeda for the entire 3 months since Order 66, serving as advisor, strategist, and symbol of Jedi survival. But the weight of those months showed, his ears drooped more, his movements were slower, and his eyes carried a sadness that even 900 years of wisdom couldn't fully process. Familiar, this is, Yoda said quietly. During the Clone Wars, defend Kashyyyk I did, alongside Wookiee warriors brave and strong. Friends, I made. Friends who now, the Empire seeks to enslave. We won't let that happen, Master Yoda. Prevent it, you can? Yoda asked, and for the first time Dylan heard something like doubt in the Jedi's voice. 3 months, we have fought. 3 months of running, hiding, rescuing survivors 1 and 2 at a time. But change the galaxy's course? Stop an empire from becoming what it will become? Captain Hunt, powerful your ship is. Advanced your technology. But endless, this fight may be. And winning a battle, not the same as winning a war. Dylan recognized the tone, he'd heard it in his own voice during the darkest days after the Commonwealth fell. The exhaustion of fighting battles you couldn't afford to lose, the grinding reality of guerrilla warfare against overwhelming odds, and the terrible question that haunted every resistance fighter, was any of this making a difference? Master Yoda, I watched the system's Commonwealth collapse. 10,000 years of civilization, destroyed because we waited too long to recognize the threats eating us from within. I spent 300 years in time dilation, frozen while my entire society fell apart. When I woke up, I had a choice, accept that the Commonwealth was dead, or fight to restore it even when every rational calculation said it was impossible. Dylan turned from the viewport to face Yoda directly. I chose to fight. Not because I knew I'd win, but because the alternative was letting everything we'd stood for die without resistance. You're right that winning battles isn't the same as winning wars. But wars aren't won by the side with the most resources, they're won by the side that refuses to stop fighting. Yoda's ears lifted slightly, and something that might have been a smile touched his ancient features. Wise words, these are. Remind me, they do, of why the Jedi survived 1,000 years. Not because perfect we were, but because give up, we did not. Even when darkness seemed overwhelming. Then let's give the Wookiees a reason to believe resistance is possible, Dylan said. And let's show the Empire that some targets cost more to attack than they're worth. A demonstration, you plan, Yoda observed. Show the galaxy, you wish to, that the Empire, not invincible it is. Exactly. The Empire's power is built on fear and inevitability. Every system that submits without resistance makes the next submission easier. But if we can prove that resistance is possible, that the Empire can be hurt, then hope, we give. And hope, the most dangerous weapon in a tyrant's galaxy it is. The Wookiee city of Kachiro had been built into the Roshar trees over thousands of years. A vertical metropolis of wooden platforms, rope bridges, and elegant architecture that merged seamlessly with the massive trees that supported it. It was beautiful, ancient, and now preparing for war. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood on one of Kachiro's highest platforms, watching Wookiee warriors organize defenses with practiced efficiency. Chewbacca, a young but already respected warrior, directed teams setting up heavy blaster emplacements and reinforcing strategic positions. The Wookiees had fought during the Clone Wars. They knew how to turn their city into a fortress. But Obi-Wan also knew it wouldn't be enough against 3 Star Destroyers and an Imperial Legion. "Master Kenobi," a voice said behind him. Anakin Skywalker approached, his expression troubled. The past 3 months had been hardest on Anakin. He'd lost the Order, lost his position, and worst of all, discovered that the man he'd trusted most had been manipulating him from the beginning. "Dylan's plan is risky. We're gambling everything on one engagement. All warfare is gambling, Anakin. You taught me that," Obi-Wan said with a slight smile. "Though I believe you were quoting it from a rather reckless manual on starfighter tactics at the time." Anakin didn't return the smile. "This is different. If we lose here, we don't just lose Kashyyyk. We prove the Empire is unstoppable. Every system thinking about resistance will fall in line. And if we win, we prove resistance is possible," Obi-Wan countered. "Master Yoda is right, hope is our most valuable weapon now. The galaxy needs to see that the Empire can be challenged. By a ship from another universe using technology we barely understand," Anakin said. "Obi-Wan, we're putting everything on the Andromeda. What happens when we face a threat Dylan's ship can't handle? What happens when we're on our own?" Obi-Wan studied his former Padawan. Anakin had always struggled with dependency, with trusting others to carry burdens he felt should be his alone. It was part of what made him a great warrior and a troubled Jedi. "Then we adapt, as we've always done," Obi-Wan said gently. "But Anakin, we're not alone because we have the Andromeda. We're not alone because we have each other, Jedi, senators, clone defectors, civilians who still believe in freedom. Captain Hunt and his ship are powerful allies, but they're not our only hope. We are." Before Anakin could respond, a massive roar echoed across the city. Chewbacca approached, flanked by Tarful, the Wookiee chieftain who'd fought alongside Yoda during the Clone Wars. The chieftain spoke in Shiriwook, the Wookiee language, his deep voice resonating with authority. "Tarful says the warriors are ready," Anakin translated, his mechanical hand clenching. "They'll fight to defend their homes. But he wants to know if we're ready to fight beside them like we did during the Clone Wars." Obi-Wan felt the weight of that question. During the Clone Wars, the Jedi had been generals, leading from the front with the full might of the Republic behind them. Now they were fugitives, with only a Commonwealth warship and scattered allies. Could they truly ask the Wookiees to risk everything on such uncertain support? "Tell Tarful," Obi-Wan said, his voice carrying the conviction that had sustained him through countless battles, that the Jedi stand with Kashyyyk. The Republic may have fallen, but the principles it represented, freedom, justice, protection of the innocent, those haven't fallen. Not while we still breathe. Chewbacca translated, and Tarful responded with a roar that was echoed by warriors throughout the city. It was a sound of defiance, of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, of a people who would not go quietly into slavery. High above Kashyyyk, the Andromeda Ascendant began its combat preparations. Weapon systems charged, shields configured for maximum defensive coverage, and tactical computers calculated firing solutions for targets that hadn't even arrived yet. On the bridge, Dylan stood at his command station, surrounded by a crew that had followed him through 3 centuries of impossible odds. Bika Valentine at helm, Harper managing tactical systems, Tirana Sazi coordinating weapons, and Andromeda's avatar overseeing it all with processing power that dwarfed anything in the Star Wars galaxy. "Captain, Imperial fleet just reverted from hyperspace at the system's edge," Andromeda reported. 3 Imperial-class Star Destroyers, 8 support frigates, and multiple troop transports. They're broadcasting surrender demands to Kashyyyk on all frequencies. "Let me guess," Dylan said. "Surrender peacefully and they'll be treated fairly. Resist and face the full might of the Empire." Essentially, yes. Though the actual wording is significantly more bureaucratic. Standard occupation doctrine, Tyr observed. Offer mercy with one hand while preparing the axe with the other. The Empire's learning quickly how to subjugate populations. Then let's teach them a different lesson, Dylan said. Rami, open a channel to the lead Star Destroyer. Let's introduce ourselves properly. The channel opened, and the face of an Imperial officer appeared on the screen, middle-aged, career military, with the distinctive rank insignia of a Commodore. His expression showed the confidence of someone accustomed to overwhelming force and inevitable victory. Unknown vessel, you are in violation of Imperial space and interfering with legitimate security operations. Identify yourself immediately or be fired upon. Commodore, I'm Captain Dylan Hunt of the Andromeda Ascendant. I'm informing you that Kashyyyk is under the protection of the Jedi Order and Allied resistance forces. Your surrender demands are rejected. You have two options. Withdraw peacefully, or test whether your Star Destroyers are as impressive as you think they are. The Commodore's expression shifted from confidence to outrage. You dare threaten an Imperial fleet? We have 3 Star Destroyers, sufficient firepower to reduce your ship to atoms. Surrender now, and I may spare your crew. Dylan smiled. Not the diplomatic expression of someone negotiating, but the cold calculation of someone who'd already run the tactical scenarios and knew exactly how this engagement would end. Commodore, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to reconsider. Because in 31 seconds, if you haven't begun your withdrawal, I'm going to demonstrate why threatening the Andromeda Ascendant is the worst decision you'll ever make. 29 seconds. The channel cut off, and Dylan could imagine the Commodore's rage, the hasty tactical conference, the decision to make an example of this arrogant unknown vessel. Captain, they're charging weapons, Andromeda reported. All 3 Star Destroyers moving to attack formation. They're taking the bait. Good, Dylan said. Let them come close enough to commit. Then show them what Commonwealth military doctrine looks like. The Imperial fleet advanced with the coordination of experienced military forces, Star Destroyers spreading into a triangle formation that would allow overlapping fire arcs. It was solid tactics against a conventional opponent. But the Andromeda was anything but conventional. Bika, Combat Approach Vector Delta 7. Let's get in close where their size works against them. With pleasure, boss, Bika replied, her hands dancing across the helm controls. The Andromeda accelerated at speeds that would have crushed organic crews without inertial dampening, closing the distance to the Imperial fleet in seconds that their targeting computers struggled to process. All forward tubes, fire at will, Dylan commanded. The Andromeda's offensive missile tubes opened, and hell itself descended on the Imperial fleet. The first salvo struck the lead Star Destroyer before its crew even registered the Andromeda had fired. 20 AP rounds impacted across the massive vessel's superstructure in a pattern that would have seemed random to observers unfamiliar with Commonwealth targeting doctrine. But Dylan knew better. Each impact point had been calculated to create cascading system failures, turning the Star Destroyer's own mass and power distribution against it. The bridge tower's deflector shield generators exploded first, overloading from kinetic impacts that released more energy than turbolaser batteries. Then the main sensor array disintegrated, blinding the ship to incoming threats. Weapons turrets along the dorsal surface crumpled like paper, their targeting computers fried by electromagnetic pulses from the missile impacts. In 15 seconds, an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, the symbol of the Empire's military might, a vessel that had helped conquer a galaxy, was reduced to a drifting hulk, its command structure destroyed and half its weapons offline. The Commodore's face reappeared on the view screen, no longer confident but pale with shock. What have you done? That's impossible. No ship can. Commodore, that was a demonstration at 30% weapons capacity, Dylan interrupted calmly. Your flagship is disabled but intact. Casualties are minimal because we targeted systems, not crew compartments. You still have 2 functional Star Destroyers and a choice: withdraw now, or discover what happens when we stop being polite. Behind Dylan, Tir-Anasazi's expression carried predatory satisfaction. Captain, the other two destroyers are powering up their heavy turbolaser batteries. They're going to attempt concentrated fire on our position. Let them try, Dylan said. Rami, divert auxiliary power to forward shields. Show them why their weapons are 3 generations behind ours. The 2 remaining Star Destroyers opened fire simultaneously, massive turbolaser batteries unleashing emerald green energy bolts that would have vaporized any Republic vessel. The space around the Andromeda lit up like a miniature sun as hundreds of turbolaser impacts converged on a single target. The Andromeda's shields didn't even flicker. Shield integrity at 98.7%, Andromeda reported with what might have been satisfaction in her synthetic voice. Their energy weapons are operating at approximately 1/3 the output of standard Commonwealth armament. We could maintain this defensive posture for approximately 72 hours before shields would require regeneration cycles. On the bridge of the second Star Destroyer, Captain Tanis stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. His weapons officer had just confirmed what the sensors were showing. Every turbolaser battery firing at full power, enough energy to melt a small moon, and the unknown vessel's shields were barely registering the impacts. What is that ship made of? Tanis demanded. Unknown, sir. The hull composition doesn't match any known alloy in Imperial databases. The shield technology operates on principles our sensors can't even classify. And sir, the weapons officer's voice cracked slightly. Their power output readings are impossible. According to our instruments, that single vessel generates more energy than our entire battle group combined. Tanis felt cold realization settle over him. The Empire had spent 3 months consolidating power, crushing scattered resistance, teaching the galaxy that opposition was futile. Every engagement had been a demonstration of overwhelming Imperial might, Star Destroyers reducing planetary defenses to rubble, clone legions sweeping aside militia forces, the machinery of galactic conquest operating with ruthless efficiency. This was different. This wasn't overwhelming might meeting token resistance. This was a predator discovering something higher on the food chain. Cease fire, Tanis ordered. All ships, break off attack and adopt defensive formation. Comms, get me a direct channel to Coruscant. Command needs to know what we're facing. But before the communications officer could comply, the Andromeda moved again. It didn't attack, that would have been expected, even merciful. Instead, the Commonwealth warship executed a maneuver that should have been impossible for a vessel its size. The Andromeda rolled inverted, accelerated past the Star Destroyer formation at speeds that made its mass irrelevant, and positioned itself between the Imperial fleet and Kashyyyk. The tactical message was clear, you're not getting past us. Dylan's voice came through on all Imperial channels, calm and implacable. Captain Tanis, Commodore whoever is in command of the third destroyer, you've now witnessed what happens when you attack the Andromeda Ascendant. Your flagship is crippled. Your weapons are ineffective. And I've positioned my ship to intercept any attempt to bombard Kashyyyk or deploy ground forces. You have 60 seconds to begin your withdrawal from this system. If you're still here in 61 seconds, I'll stop targeting your systems and start targeting your engines. You'll be stranded in space, waiting for the Empire to send recovery vessels, broadcasting to every system in range that an entire Imperial battle group was defeated by a single ship. Dylan paused, letting the implications sink in. Or you can withdraw, report that Kashyyyk's defenses were stronger than anticipated, and recommend the Empire focus its resources on easier targets. Your choice, gentlemen. 50 seconds. On Kashyyyk, in the city of Kachiro, Wookiee warriors and Jedi survivors watched the battle unfold through long-range viewers and tactical displays. They saw the massive Star Destroyer drifting helplessly. They saw the other 2 Imperial vessels cease fire and fall back into defensive formation. And they saw the Andromeda Ascendant hold position between the Empire and their homeworld like an ancient guardian from myth. Chewbacca roared in triumph, and the sound was echoed by thousands of Wookiee warriors throughout the city. They had prepared to fight a desperate defensive battle against overwhelming odds. Instead, they were witnessing something they'd thought impossible, the Empire retreating. By the Force, Obi-Wan breathed, watching the tactical display. Dylan's actually doing it. He's forcing them to withdraw without destroying a single ship. Minimal casualties, maximum psychological impact, Anakin observed, his tactical mind appreciating the elegance of the strategy. The Empire can't claim they were defeated by superior numbers or surprise attacks. They were simply outmatched, ship to ship, by technology they can't compete with. When word spreads, systems considering resistance will see hope, Ahsoka finished. And the Empire will realize it's not invincible. Master Yoda stood apart from the others, his ancient eyes fixed on the distant Andromeda. Through the Force, he could sense the absence where the ship should be, a void in the cosmic web that had initially troubled him. But now, watching Dylan Hunt defend Kashyyyk without unnecessary bloodshed, demonstrating power but tempering it with restraint, Yoda felt something shift in his understanding. Perhaps the Force's absence in Dylan and his crew wasn't a weakness or aberration. Perhaps it was balance of a different kind, a reminder that the galaxy contained forces and powers beyond the Jedi's mystical traditions. And perhaps that's exactly what was needed to oppose an enemy who'd corrupted the Force itself from within. 40 seconds, Dylan's voice echoed across Imperial channels. The countdown continued with relentless precision, each second ticking away the Empire's options and dignity. Captain Tanis made his decision. All ships, execute hyperspace withdrawal to designated fallback coordinates. Inform Imperial Command that Kashyyyk's defensive capabilities were severely underestimated and recommend postponing occupation operations pending further intelligence. It was a retreat dressed in bureaucratic language, but everyone involved knew the truth. The Empire had been defeated. Not destroyed, Dylan had deliberately avoided that to prevent martyrs and escalation, but humiliated, driven away by a single vessel they couldn't damage or overcome. The 3 Star Destroyers, one crippled and under tow by the others, began their withdrawal, their massive engines flaring as they accelerated toward hyperspace jump coordinates. Within minutes, they vanished into hyperspace, leaving Kashyyyk defended and the Wookiees free. On the Andromeda's bridge, Dylan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not victory, this was one battle in a war that would last years, but successful demonstration that the Empire could be opposed. Rami, damage report. Shields regenerating to full capacity. Hull integrity 100%. Ammunition expenditure minimal, we used less than 2% of our AP round inventory. Fuel consumption within acceptable parameters. Captain, that engagement cost us almost nothing and achieved everything we hoped for. Except permanence, Dylan said, his tactical realism reasserting itself. We saved Kashyyyk today, but we can't defend every world the Empire targets. We've bought time and created a symbol, but the Empire will adapt. They'll develop new tactics, bring overwhelming numbers, or find ways to counter our advantages. Then we adapt faster, Bika said from the helm. It's what we've always done, Dylan. The Magog swarmed Commonwealth space with numbers that made the Empire look tiny, and we found ways to fight them. The Nietzscheans had superior genetics and warrior culture, and we survived their uprising. The Empire's just the latest threat that thinks it's unstoppable. The difference, Tyr interjected, is that we had the Commonwealth's industrial capacity, training infrastructure, and thousands of worlds supporting us. Here, we have one ship and scattered allies. The strategic mathematics are considerably less favorable. Which is why we need to change the equation, Dylan said. He activated the ship-wide comm, all hands, excellent work. We've demonstrated that the Empire can be challenged and defeated. But this was the easy part. Now comes the hard part, turning one symbolic victory into sustained resistance. He turned to Andromeda's avatar. Rami, prepare a comprehensive mission report for our network. I want every resistance cell, every sympathetic senator, every planetary defense force to know exactly what happened here. The Empire will try to suppress this information, but we're going to make sure it spreads faster than they can contain it. Already done, Captain. Harper's embedded the battle footage in 47 different data streams using encryption the Empire won't crack for months. By this time tomorrow, half the galaxy will have seen the Andromeda Ascendant send 3 Star Destroyers running. Good. Because we're about to become the most wanted ship in Imperial space. On Coruscant, in the throne room that had once been the Chancellor's office but now served as the Emperor's seat of absolute power, Darth Sidious received the report from Kashyyyk with emotions that would have surprised anyone who thought they understood the Sith Lord. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even particularly concerned. He was intrigued. 3 Star Destroyers, Sidious mused, his yellow Sith eyes reflecting the holographic tactical display showing the Andromeda's capabilities. Defeated without a single hull breach on that infernal vessel. Weapons that operate on principles our scientists cannot explain. Shields that treat turbolaser batteries like children's toys. Grand Moff Tarkin stood at attention, his gaunt features arranged in an expression of professional concern. Tarkin had been one of the first officers to embrace the New Order, seeing in the Empire what the Republic should have been. Ruthlessly efficient, unbound by democratic weakness, and commanded by strength rather than debate. Your Majesty, I've reviewed the engagement recordings our surviving ships transmitted. The unknown vessel, this Andromeda Ascendant, represents a significant threat to Imperial expansion. It's not merely advanced, it operates on entirely different technological principles. Our standard tactics and weapons are useless against it. And what do you recommend, Grand Moff Tarkin? Overwhelming force, Your Majesty. The vessel may be individually superior, but it's still one ship. If we concentrate multiple battle groups, 20, 30 Star Destroyers, even advanced shields must eventually fail under sustained bombardment. Sidious smiled, and the expression carried no warmth whatsoever. And lose how many ships in the process? 10? 15? The Empire is still consolidating power, Grand Moff. We cannot afford Pyrrhic victories that make us appear desperate or vulnerable. No, this situation requires a different approach. Your Majesty.
The Andromeda is commanded by this Captain Hunt, the outsider who interfered during my confrontation with the Jedi. He saved Mace Windu, disrupted Order 66's completeness, and now positions himself as the Resistance's champion. But he's not from this galaxy. He's stranded here, cut off from whatever civilization spawned his vessel's remarkable technology. Sidious rose from his throne, moving to the viewport that showed Coruscant's endless cityscape. Every being has weaknesses, Grand Moff. Even those from other universes. Hunt may have superior technology, but he's alone in a galaxy he doesn't understand, fighting a war with limited resources against an empire with effectively infinite reserves. Time is on our side. You intend to wait him out, Your Majesty. I intend to let him exhaust himself, Sidious corrected. Every battle he fights depletes resources he cannot replace. Every rescue mission spreads his forces thinner. Every symbolic victory raises expectations he cannot possibly meet. Hunt thinks he's helping the Resistance, but he's actually assuming responsibility for an impossible task, defending an entire galaxy with a single ship. And when he fails, Sidious said softly, the psychological impact on the Resistance will be devastating. They've just witnessed their greatest champion defeat an Imperial fleet. When that champion inevitably falls. And he will fall, Grand Moff, because even the most advanced ship has limits, the hope he created will transform into despair. The Resistance will fracture, systems will abandon their opposition, and the Empire will emerge stronger for having overcome this challenge. Tarkin nodded slowly, appreciating the strategic elegance. So we don't fight the Andromeda directly. We force it to fight everywhere simultaneously until its advantages become irrelevant. Precisely. Increase Imperial operations across all sectors. Target worlds where resistance is likely. Force Hunt to choose which populations to save and which to abandon. Every world he doesn't defend becomes proof that the resistance cannot protect its allies. Every battle he fights exhausts resources he cannot replenish. And the Inquisitors, Your Majesty? Should they focus on eliminating the Jedi survivors the Andromeda has rescued? Sidious's eyes gleamed with malevolent calculation. No. Let them continue hunting scattered Jedi. Hunt will stretch himself further and further, trying to rescue Force sensitives across the galaxy while simultaneously defending worlds and building resistance networks. Eventually, he'll be forced to prioritize. And when he does, when he lets someone die because he couldn't be everywhere at once, his allies will begin questioning whether their champion is truly invincible. A war of attrition. The only war that matters, Grand Moff. Battles are dramatic, but wars are won through logistics, sustainability, and breaking the enemy's will to continue fighting. The Andromeda Ascendant may be technologically superior, but it exists in an impossible strategic position. And impossible positions, given enough time and pressure, always collapse. Sidious returned to his throne, already contemplating the dozens of operations that would begin pressuring resistance networks across the galaxy. Hunt had won his symbolic victory at Kashyyyk. Now came the test of whether he could sustain that victory when the Empire stopped playing defensively and forced him onto his back foot. Inform the Imperial Security Bureau that the Andromeda Ascendant is now the Empire's highest priority intelligence target. I want to know everything about that ship, its capabilities, its limitations, its crew, and most importantly, its fuel and supply requirements. Every vessel has vulnerabilities, Grand Moff. We will find theirs. Yes, Your Majesty. As Tarkin departed, Sidious allowed himself a moment of genuine satisfaction. The Jedi Order was shattered. The celebration on Kashyyyk lasted 3 days. Dylan had tried to discourage it, they'd won one battle, not the war, and the Empire would return with a different strategy. But Tarful and the Wookiee elders insisted. For 3 years, they'd fought in the Clone Wars, watching brothers die in battles that seemed to have no end. Then Order 66 had betrayed them, the Republic had become an empire, and freedom itself seemed lost. The Andromeda's intervention had given them something they'd nearly forgotten, hope. On the third night, Dylan stood on a platform high in the Rosher trees, watching Wookiee families gather in celebration below. Fires burned in traditional braziers, casting warm light across the wooden architecture. Warriors who'd prepared to die defending their homes now danced with their cubs. Elders who'd witnessed the Republic's transformation into tyranny now spoke of resistance and freedom. They needed this, Obi-Wan said, joining Dylan at the railing. The Jedi Master held a wooden cup filled with some Wookiee beverage that smelled vaguely combustible. 3 months of running and hiding. 3 months of watching the Empire consolidate power while we could do nothing but survive. They needed to see that we can win. We didn't win, Dylan said quietly. We delayed. There's a difference. Is there? Obi-Wan took a sip of his drink and grimaced slightly. To a philosopher, perhaps. But to warriors who'd resigned themselves to slavery, to Jedi who'd watched their order destroyed, to families who thought they'd lost their freedom forever, what happened here was a victory. Don't diminish that, Captain. Sometimes, belief matters more than strategic reality. Dylan wanted to argue, wanted to explain the tactical mathematics that made one victory meaningless in a galactic-scale conflict. But he'd seen this before in the Commonwealth, the way belief could sustain resistance even when logic said it was hopeless. Sometimes, people needed to see proof that the impossible could become possible. The Empire will adapt, Dylan said instead. Sidious isn't stupid. He'll have analyzed the engagement, identified our advantages, and developed countermeasures. Next time we face Imperial forces, they'll come prepared. Then we adapt in turn, Obi-Wan replied. It's not so different from lightsaber combat, really. Your opponent learns your patterns, you change your patterns. They develop new attacks, you develop new defenses. The Force teaches us that life is constant change, constant adaptation. The Force, Dylan said, the words carrying curiosity rather than skepticism. Master Kenobi, I've been meaning to ask, what does it feel like? Sensing this energy field that connects all living things. Being able to manipulate reality through mystical connection rather than technology. Obi-Wan considered the question carefully. Few non-Force sensitives ever asked about the actual experience rather than just the abilities it granted. Imagine, Obi-Wan said slowly, that you could hear the heartbeat of every living thing around you. Not literally, but as a presence, a awareness. When I'm in a room with people, I feel them through the Force, their emotions, their intentions, their life energy. It's like being part of a vast web where every strand connects to every other strand. And manipulating it. Moving objects, influencing minds. That's where the mysticism becomes practical, Obi-Wan admitted. The Force responds to intent, to will shaped by training and discipline. When I move an object through telekinesis, I'm not generating mechanical force. I'm asking the Force to bridge the gap between my intention and reality. It's partnership, not domination. Dylan absorbed this, his analytical mind processing mysticism through the lens of Commonwealth science. And you can't sense me or my crew through this Force. We're just, absent. Completely, Obi-Wan confirmed. It's disconcerting, honestly. When I look at you, I see a person, hear your voice, observe your actions. But through the Force, there's nothing. It's like talking to a sophisticated hologram. All the appearance of life but none of the energetic signature. Does it bother you? Initially, yes, Obi-Wan said honestly. The Jedi have relied on Force sense for so long that encountering beings we cannot sense feels like being blind. But I've come to see it differently. Your crew represents proof that the Force isn't universal, that other realities exist with their own fundamental laws. That's humbling, but also liberating. Liberating how? The Jedi became arrogant, Captain. We assumed our connection to the Force made us special, gave us wisdom beyond other beings. We forgot that the Force is just one way of understanding reality, not the only way. Your presence here, beings who accomplish remarkable things without any Force connection, reminds us that power and wisdom come in many forms. Before Dylan could respond, a massive roar echoed across the platform. Chewbacca approached, flanked by Tarful. The young Wookiee warrior had been instrumental in defending Kashyyyk, and in the past 3 days, he and Dylan had developed a mutual respect based on shared warrior culture. Chewbacca spoke in Shiriwook, gesturing emphatically toward Dylan and then toward the celebration below. He says the warriors want to honor you properly, Obi-Wan translated. You defended their world when even the Republic abandoned them. In Wookiee culture, that creates a life debt. A bond of honor that transcends normal obligation. I appreciate the sentiment, Dylan said carefully, but I was just doing my job. Protecting those who can't protect themselves. No debt is necessary. Tarful responded with a series of deep vocalizations, his tone carrying the weight of cultural tradition. Obi-Wan's expression shifted to something between amusement and concern. He says that's exactly why the debt exists. You acted without expectation of reward or obligation. In Wookiee culture, that's the highest form of honor. Chewbacca has requested permission to accompany the Andromeda as a warrior in your crew. He wants to fight beside you against the Empire. Dylan looked at the young Wookiee, barely into adulthood by his species standards, but already a proven warrior with skills that would be valuable in the campaigns ahead. But accepting Chewbacca also meant accepting responsibility for him, putting him in danger, potentially getting him killed in a war that wasn't originally his to fight. Tell him, Dylan said slowly, that I'm honored by his offer. But he should understand what he's volunteering for. The Andromeda doesn't have an army behind it. We're outnumbered, outmatched in terms of resources, and fighting an empire that controls most of the known galaxy. If he comes with us, he'll be in constant danger, and I can't guarantee I'll be able to bring him home. Obi-Wan translated, and Chewbacca's response was immediate and emphatic, a roar that carried no hesitation or doubt. He says, Obi-Wan translated with a slight smile, that warriors don't seek guarantees. They seek worthy causes. And fighting beside the ship that saved his world is the most worthy cause he can imagine. Dylan extended his hand, a gesture that transcended species and cultures. Chewbacca grasped it, his massive paw engulfing Dylan's hand, and sealed the bond that would make him one of the Andromeda's crew. Welcome aboard, Chewbacca. I hope you don't regret this decision. Chewbacca roared again, this time with what sounded like laughter, and Obi-Wan's translation was unnecessary. The young Wookiee was eager for adventure, for purpose, for the chance to strike back at the Empire that had tried to enslave his people. While celebrations continued on Kashyyyk, in the Andromeda's conference room, a much grimmer discussion was taking place. Master Yoda, Anakin, Ahsoka, Senator Bail Organa, via holographic transmission, and Mon Mothma, also holographic, had gathered to assess their strategic position. Harper had compiled comprehensive intelligence on Imperial operations across the galaxy, and the picture it painted was troubling. 47 worlds have reported increased Imperial military presence in the past week, Mon Mothma said, her holographic form displaying data streams. The Empire isn't pulling back, it's expanding operations. They're targeting systems with known resistance sympathies, establishing garrison forces, and implementing what they call security protocols that amount to martial law. They're testing us, Anakin said, his tactical mind immediately recognizing the strategy. Spreading operations across so many worlds that we can't possibly defend them all. Every world we don't protect becomes proof the resistance can't deliver on its promises. Classic attrition warfare, Dylan agreed. Force us to choose which battles to fight, exhaust our resources responding to threats across multiple sectors, and gradually demonstrate that even our technological advantages can't overcome strategic overextension. Then what do we do? Ahsoka asked. We can't ignore worlds crying out for help, but we also can't be everywhere at once. We can't, Dylan said. But we can make the Empire pay a higher price for every world they try to occupy. Rami, show them the analysis Harper and I have been working on. Andromeda's avatar appeared, and holographic displays showed Imperial supply lines, communication networks, and logistical infrastructure. Red markers indicated vulnerabilities, choke points where single strikes could disrupt operations across entire sectors. The Empire's strength is its scale, Dylan explained. Thousands of worlds, millions of ships, effectively unlimited resources. But that scale requires massive logistical support. Supply convoys, communication relays, refueling stations, infrastructure that's vulnerable to surgical strikes. You're proposing we attack their supply lines rather than defend individual worlds, Bail Organa said, understanding the strategy immediately. Exactly. We can't be everywhere, but we can make everywhere expensive for the Empire. Every supply convoy we destroy forces them to divert resources to escort duties. Every communication relay we sabotage blinds them in that sector. Every refueling station we disable limits their operational range. Guerrilla warfare, Yoda observed. Strike where they are weak, vanish before they respond. Make the Empire's size become its vulnerability. It's what the Nietzscheans did to the Commonwealth, Dylan said, old pain flickering in his expression. They couldn't match our fleet strength, so they attacked our infrastructure. Disrupted trade, destroyed communication networks, forced us to spread our forces so thin that we couldn't effectively defend anything. It worked because we kept trying to protect everything instead of adapting our strategy. And you're proposing we do the same to the Empire, Mon Mothma said. Turn their tactical advantages into strategic weaknesses. With one critical difference, Dylan added. The Commonwealth fell because we didn't recognize the threat until too late. The Empire knows we're dangerous, but they're underestimating how much damage a single well-equipped ship can do to a logistics network. By the time they adapt, we'll have inspired other resistance cells to adopt similar tactics. Anakin leaned forward, studying the tactical displays. This means abandoning direct defense. Worlds like Kashyyyk, we got lucky there because the Empire sent a small force as a test. But if they come back with 20 Star Destroyers, we can't stop them. No, we can't, Dylan admitted. But we can make that commitment so expensive that they think twice before making it. If defending Kashyyyk requires 20 Star Destroyers, that's 20 ships not available for other operations. If maintaining that occupation requires constant supply convoys that we keep destroying, suddenly Kashyyyk becomes a resource drain rather than a conquest. Make every occupation Pyrrhic, Bail said slowly. Force the Empire to choose between controlling territory or maintaining operational capacity. Risky, this strategy is, Yoda warned. Abandon direct defense, and systems may lose faith in the resistance. See us as raiders rather than protectors. Which is why we need to be selective, Dylan said. Major population centers where we can make a visible stand, like Kashyyyk, we defend. But the Empire's trying to occupy hundreds of minor worlds simultaneously. Those, we can't protect directly. Instead, we make sure the Empire can't effectively control them either. Senator Organa's holographic form shifted as he consulted data. There's political dimension to consider. The Senate still exists, even if it's been reduced to ceremonial function. If the resistance is seen as pure military force, Palpatine can dismiss us as terrorists. But if we combine military action with political legitimacy, you're suggesting we form a formal government in exile, Mon Mothma said. A rebel alliance with political structure, not just military operations. Exactly. I've been quietly polling senators who opposed Palpatine's emergency powers. At least 30 are willing to formally declare the Empire illegitimate and form an alternative government. Combined with military victories like Kashyyyk, we'd have both political and martial legitimacy. Dylan considered this. The Commonwealth had been both government and military force, the High Guard had served civilian leadership, not operated as independent warlords. If the resistance could establish similar structure, it would be fighting not just for survival but for genuine alternative to imperial rule. How long would it take to organize this rebel alliance formally? Dylan asked. Weeks, possibly months, Bail admitted. We'd need secure location for a base, political framework that represents diverse systems, military command structure that integrates various resistance cells. It's not just declaring ourselves a government, it's building infrastructure to function as one. Then we buy you that time, Dylan said. The Andromeda keeps hitting Imperial logistics, conducting rescue operations, and demonstrating that resistance is possible. Meanwhile, you build the political foundation that makes this rebellion legitimate. Ambitious, this plan is, Yoda said. But necessary. Fight the Empire with military force alone, we cannot. Must show the galaxy that an alternative exists, we must. That freedom, not just a dream it is, but achievable reality. There's one more element we need to address, Anakin said, his expression troubled. The Jedi. Master Yoda, we have 43 survivors, 43 out of 10,000. The Order is effectively extinct. What do we do? Try to rebuild what was lost, or accept that the Jedi as we knew them are gone? The question hung heavy in the conference room. It was the issue every surviving Jedi had been avoiding for 3 months. What came after the Order? Yoda closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 9 centuries of tradition confronting its own mortality. Extinct, the old order is, Yoda said quietly. But die, the Jedi way must not. Adapt, it must. Learn from our failures, we must. 3,000 years, the Jedi served the Republic. became so tied to its government, we did, that when it fell, we fell with it. Arrogant, we became. Certain of our righteousness, our connection to the Force. So what do we become? Ahsoka asked. If not the Jedi Order, then what? The Jedi, Yoda said simply. Not an order with rigid hierarchy and central temple. But individuals, scattered across the galaxy, each interpreting the Force's guidance according to their understanding. Trust ourselves, we must. A network rather than an order, Obi-Wan said, understanding. Jedi working independently but coordinating when necessary. No central authority to corrupt or eliminate. Exactly. Failed, the old way has. Time for new way, it is. Dylan watched the Jedi grapple with the death of their ancient traditions and felt unexpected kinship. The system's commonwealth had fallen, and he'd spent 3 centuries trying to restore it exactly as it had been. Perhaps that had been his mistake. Perhaps restoration wasn't about recreating the past but learning from it to build something better. Then we have our strategy, Dylan said. Political legitimacy through the Rebel Alliance. Military effectiveness through guerrilla tactics against Imperial logistics. And Jedi operating as independent protectors rather than centralized force. It's not going to be easy, and the Empire will fight us every step of the way. When has anything worth doing been easy? Anakin said with a slight smile, the first Dylan had seen from him in weeks. Harper, Dylan called through the comm, start compiling target lists for Imperial infrastructure. Focus on supply routes in the Outer Rim where Imperial control is weakest. I want strike options ready within 24 hours. Already on it, boss, Harper's voice came back. I've identified 37 high-value targets where single strikes would create disproportionate disruption. Give me the word, and we can start making the Empire's life very complicated. Make it happen. Rami, prepare the ship for extended operations. We're moving from defensive to offensive operations. As the meeting broke up and holographic participants disconnected, Yoda remained, his ancient eyes fixed on Dylan with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something beyond the physical. Captain Hunt, a question, I have. Of course, Master Yoda. Your Commonwealth, fell it did. 300 years, you have fought to restore it. But restore what, exactly? The civilization that was, or the principles it represented? Dylan paused, the question cutting deeper than Yoda might have realized. It was the same question he'd been avoiding since arriving in this galaxy. Was he fighting to recreate the past or build something new? I don't know anymore, Dylan admitted. I thought I was fighting to restore the Commonwealth exactly as it was. But that Commonwealth had flaws, corruption, complacency, arrogance. Maybe it fell because it needed to fall. Wise, this realization is, Yoda said. Attachment to the past, leads to suffering it does. Learn from it, we must. But recreate it exactly. That way, stagnation lies. So what do I do? Give up on the Commonwealth entirely? No, Yoda said firmly. But fight for its principles, not its structure. Freedom, justice, protection of innocent life, these transcend any government or organization. These, worth fighting for they are, regardless of what form they take. Dylan felt something shift inside him, a burden he'd carried for 3 centuries becoming lighter. Perhaps Yoda was right. Perhaps he'd been fighting for the wrong thing, trying to resurrect a corpse instead of nurturing new life. Thank you, Master Yoda. That's something I needed to hear. Welcome, you are, Captain Hunt. Now, ready the ship, we must. An empire to fight, we have. And fight it, we will. Not to restore what was, but to build what should be. As Yoda departed, Dylan stood alone in the conference room, looking out at Kashyyyk celebration lights below. 3 months ago, he'd been thrown into this galaxy by accident, unprepared and uncertain. Now, he had purpose. Not to restore the past, but to fight for principles that transcended universes, freedom, justice, and the belief that tyranny could be opposed. The Empire thought it had won. It was about to learn otherwise. The Imperial supply convoy designated Echo 77 moved through hyperspace with the confidence of a military operation in friendly territory. 6 bulk freighters carrying weapons, armor, and provisions for garrison forces on Ryloth, escorted by 2 Arquitens-class light cruisers. Standard convoy protocol, enough firepower to discourage pirates, but not so much that it suggested the Empire expected serious resistance. They never saw the Andromeda Ascendant coming. The Commonwealth warship dropped out of hyperspace directly in the convoy's path, its presence on sensors so sudden that the escort cruiser's targeting computers struggled to acquire a lock. Before the Imperial crews could even sound battle stations, the Andromeda's point defense lasers spoke with surgical precision. 24 precisely targeted shots. Not at the ships themselves, but at their hyperspace motivators, the delicate systems that allowed faster-than-light travel. The convoy's freighters lurched out of hyperspace in cascading failures, their crews suddenly stranded in real space with damaged engines and no way to escape. The escort cruisers fared worse. Their weapons systems simply died, disabled by electromagnetic pulses from the Andromeda's AP rounds. Within 30 seconds of the engagement beginning, an entire Imperial convoy was dead in space, helpless but alive. Dylan's voice came through on all frequencies, calm and professional. Imperial vessels, this is Captain Dylan Hunt. Your convoy is now disabled. Abandon ship in your escape pods, you have 5 minutes to evacuate before we destroy your cargo. Any hostile action will be met with lethal force. On the lead cruiser's bridge, Captain Vander stared at the massive warship that had appeared from nowhere. He'd received briefings about the Andromeda Ascendant, the ship that had humiliated 3 Star Destroyers at Kashyyyk. But intelligence reports hadn't prepared him for the reality of facing a vessel that could disable an entire convoy in seconds. "Sir, what are your orders?" his first officer asked, though the man's voice carried the edge of someone who already knew the answer. "Evacuate the ship," Vander said quietly. "All crew to escape pods. There's no point dying for cargo we can't defend." 5 minutes later, escape pods scattered across local space, carrying Imperial crews to safety while their ships drifted empty. The Andromeda systematically destroyed each freighter, not with overwhelming firepower but with precise shots that triggered cargo bay explosions. The weapons and supplies intended for Ryloth's occupation force became expanding clouds of debris. "That's the 8th convoy this week," Bika said from the helm, watching the last freighter explode. "The Empire's going to start using heavier escorts." "Let them," Dylan replied. "Heavier escorts mean more ships pulled from frontline operations. Every Star Destroyer assigned to convoy duty is one less destroyer oppressing a populated system. We're making them choose between protecting their logistics and maintaining their occupation forces. And when they choose to protect their logistics with overwhelming force, then we adapt. Harper, how are those alternate strike options coming?" Harper's face appeared on a monitor, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd been let loose in an opponent's computer systems. "Oh, boss, you're going to love this. I've been mapping the Empire's communication relay network, the systems that let them coordinate across the galaxy. Turns out, there are 16 critical relay stations that handle most of the Outer Rim's military communications. Take out even 3 or 4, and whole sectors go deaf. Security? Minimal. The Empire's focused on protecting obvious military targets, bases, shipyards, fleet concentrations. They're assuming nobody would be crazy enough to attack communication infrastructure because the strategic value isn't immediately obvious. But long-term? Long-term, it's devastating. Can't coordinate fleet movements, can't call for reinforcements, can't even confirm if orders were received. The Empire becomes a collection of isolated units making decisions based on outdated information. Dylan smiled. This was the kind of asymmetric warfare the Commonwealth had taught him. finding vulnerabilities in systems so large they assumed their scale made them invulnerable. Designate 3 relay stations in different sectors. We'll hit them simultaneously using the Jedi teams we've been training. The Andromeda provides insertion and extraction, but the actual operations are led by Jedi who know how to move unseen. Guerrilla warfare, Tyr observed. Finally, we're playing to our actual strengths rather than engaging in conventional military operations. The Jedi won't like it, Bika warned. They're trained as warriors and peacekeepers, not saboteurs. Then they adapt or they fail, Tyr said bluntly. The Empire has already proven it can crush conventional resistance. Either the Jedi learn new tactics or they become extinct. Dylan shot Tyr a warning look. The Nietzschean's brutal pragmatism was useful but needed tempering around allies who weren't accustomed to such cold calculation. We'll present it as strategic necessity. Master Yoda understands that the old Jedi methods failed against Sidious. This is about survival first, philosophy second. In the Andromeda's training bay, Anakin Skywalker taught Ahsoka and 3 other young Jedi survivors a very different kind of combat than they'd learned at the temple. Forget everything you know about lightsaber forms, Anakin said, demonstrating a strike that would have made Master Windu wince. You're not dueling Sith Lords or leading clone armies anymore. You're infiltrating Imperial facilities, disabling systems, and escaping before they know you were there. That requires speed, stealth, and efficiency, not elegance. He attacked a training droid with movements that were economical rather than graceful, strikes aimed at critical systems, no wasted motion, each hit designed to disable rather than destroy. The droid collapsed in seconds, its central processor severed. Form 2 would have been slower, Anakin continued. Form V would have been too aggressive. This isn't about defeating your enemy in honorable combat. It's about accomplishing your mission and surviving. Master Skywalker, one of the younger Jedi, a Mirialan named Cara, spoke hesitantly. This feels wrong. The Jedi Code teaches us to be guardians, not assassins. The Jedi Code led to Order 66, Anakin said, his voice harder than he intended. The Code taught us to trust in the Force, serve the Republic, and believe our righteousness would protect us. How did that work out? The training bay fell silent. Anakin saw the hurt in his students' eyes and forced himself to moderate his tone. They were young, traumatized by watching their order destroyed, and desperately seeking guidance from one of the few Jedi Masters who'd survived. I'm sorry, Anakin said. That was unfair. The Code isn't wrong, our interpretation of it was. We became so focused on maintaining peace that we forgot sometimes peace requires difficult choices. Sometimes, protecting the innocent means getting your hands dirty. But where's the line? Ahsoka asked. If we abandon Jedi principles in the name of fighting the Empire, how are we different from Sith? It was the question Anakin had been wrestling with for 3 months. The same question that had haunted him since Palpatine's revelation. Where was the line between necessary pragmatism and the dark side's corruption? Intent, Anakin said finally. The Sith seek power for themselves. They use the dark side to dominate, control, and rule. We're fighting to protect others, to restore freedom, to oppose tyranny. The actions might sometimes look similar, but the motivation defines us. And if we start enjoying it? Cara pressed. If the violence becomes easier, if we start seeing enemies rather than people? Then we watch each other, Anakin said. We stay connected, stay honest about our struggles, and trust our fellow Jedi to pull us back when we go too far. The old order isolated Jedi emotionally. Attachments were forbidden, emotions were suppressed. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe we need connections to keep us grounded. The training bay door opened, and Obi-Wan entered, his expression carrying news. Anakin, Captain Hunt needs us. He's planned operations against Imperial communication relays, and he wants Jedi teams to lead the strikes. Sabotage missions, Anakin said. Exactly what we've been training for. Obi-Wan's gaze swept across the young Jedi, seeing their uncertainty and determination in equal measure. Are they ready? No, Anakin admitted. But we're out of time for ready. The Empire's consolidating power faster than we can build resistance. We either commit to this new way of fighting, or we stay hidden until the Empire hunts us down one by one. Then I suppose we embrace our new role, Obi-Wan said with a wry smile. From peacekeepers to saboteurs. The Council would be appalled. The Council is dead, Anakin said bluntly. We're what's left. And what's left has to be enough. The Imperial communication relay on Ord Mantell sat atop a mountain, its massive antenna array reaching into the clouds. It was one of 16 relay stations that handled military communications for the Outer Rim, a critical node in the network that allowed the Empire to coordinate operations across dozens of systems. And tonight, it would go dark. Ahsoka Tano crouched in the shadows outside the relay facility, watching Imperial technicians and security forces move through their routines. The facility wasn't heavily defended, the Empire assumed its remote location and perceived low strategic value made it safe from attack. 24 security personnel, basic sensors, and confidence born of 3 months of unopposed Imperial expansion. They were about to learn that confidence was a vulnerability. Team 2, status, Ahsoka whispered into her comlink, using the encrypted frequency the Andromeda had provided. In position, Anakin's voice came back. He was leading the assault on a different relay station 3 systems away. Waiting on your signal. Team 3. Ahsoka asked. Ready, Obi-Wan confirmed from his position at the 3rd target. Though I should note that I preferred missions where we announced ourselves and fought honorably. File a complaint with the Empire, Anakin replied dryly. I'm sure they'll take it under consideration. Both of you, focus, Ahsoka said, though she smiled despite the tension. The ability to maintain humor in combat situations was something she'd learned from Anakin, a way to manage fear and maintain perspective. Rami, we're ready for your part. High above Ord Mantell, invisible to Imperial sensors, the Andromeda Ascendant began its electronic warfare operation. Andromeda's processing power, vastly superior to anything in the Star Wars galaxy, reached into the relay station's computer systems like a ghost, creating false sensor readings and phantom communications that would keep the facility's attention focused inward rather than on external threats. Sensors compromised, Andromeda reported. You have a 10-minute window before their technicians realize something's wrong. Plenty of time, Ahsoka said. She activated her lightsaber. Not the blue blade she'd carried as Anakin's Padawan, but the green blade she'd constructed from parts salvaged after Order 66. It hummed to life, casting jade light across the mountain darkness. Her team, 3 Jedi survivors and 2 former clone troopers who'd removed their control chips, moved with practiced efficiency. They'd trained aboard the Andromeda for weeks, learning Commonwealth infiltration tactics adapted for Force users. Speed, precision, and leaving no trace they'd been there until it was too late. The facility's security forces never knew what hit them. Ahsoka moved through the installation like a dancer, her lightsaber deflecting the few blaster shots fired by surprised guards. But she wasn't killing, stunning, disarming, disabling. Every target was neutralized but alive, unconscious guards scattered through corridors like fallen statues. The 2 former clones. Cody had been one, having finally overcome his programming with the Andromeda's help, moved with military precision, placing explosive charges on the massive computer banks that processed and relayed military communications across 20 systems. Charges set, Cody reported, his voice tight. It still hurt him to act against the Empire he'd once served, but the knowledge of how deeply he'd been programmed and manipulated had transformed that pain into determination. We have 2 minutes before the technicians bypass Andromeda's interference. Then we're leaving, Ahsoka said. All teams, fall back to extraction points. They retreated through the facility as Imperial technicians finally realized they were under attack. Alarms shrieked, reinforcements rushed toward the relay station's core. Detonating charges in 3, 2, 1. The relay station's core exploded in a cascade of electromagnetic pulses and structural failures. The massive antenna array collapsed, its delicate systems fried beyond repair. 20 systems that had relied on that relay for military coordination suddenly found themselves isolated, unable to confirm orders or report status. Team 1 successful, Ahsoka reported. Clean operation, no casualties on either side. Team 2 successful, Anakin confirmed. Though, clean, is generous. We had to fight our way out. Team 3 successful, Obi-Wan added. And I maintain this would have been easier if we'd simply walked in and asked them politely to shut down. Your complaint has been noted, Master Kenobi, Dylan's voice cut through with dry amusement. All teams return to the Andromeda. We're jumping to hyperspace before Imperial forces can respond. The 3 teams rendezvoused aboard the Andromeda, and the Commonwealth warship vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind 3 crippled relay stations and an Empire suddenly discovering that its communication network wasn't as secure as they'd assumed. On Coruscant, in the Imperial Security Bureau's Operations Center, analysts stared at their displays in growing alarm. 3 relay stations had been attacked simultaneously in different sectors. Precise, coordinated strikes that suggested intelligence and planning far beyond simple resistance cells. It's the Andromeda, one analyst said unnecessarily. This is their work. They're not just defending worlds anymore, they're attacking our infrastructure. Get this to Grand Moff Tarkin immediately, the senior officer commanded. The Emperor needs to know the Resistance has changed tactics. In his throne room, Darth Sidious received the report with an expression that might have been satisfaction. Sabotage, he mused. Captain Hunt is learning. He's realized he cannot defend the galaxy, so he's chosen to make governing it more expensive for us. Your Majesty, if he continues attacking infrastructure, our operational efficiency could degrade significantly, Tarkin warned. We're designed for conquest and occupation, not asymmetric warfare against an opponent who can strike anywhere and vanish before we respond. Then we force him to fight conventionally, Sidious said. Grand Moff, I want you to identify targets the Resistance cannot ignore, population centers with Resistance sympathies, worlds where Jedi survivors are hiding, systems that openly oppose my rise to power. Make them choose between defending what they care about and continuing their guerrilla campaign. Draw them into open battle where our numerical superiority becomes relevant. Precisely. And Grand Moff, when you select these targets, make certain the operations are visible. I want the galaxy to see what happens to systems that harbor rebels. Fear is a more effective tool than any weapon. The doctrine of fear, Tarkin said, understanding blooming across his features. Make resistance so costly that even sympathetic systems will turn on rebels rather than face Imperial reprisal. Exactly. Hunt thinks he's fighting a war of attrition. He's about to learn that attrition works both ways. Every world he doesn't defend becomes proof the Resistance cannot protect its allies. And when populations turn on the rebels who brought Imperial wrath upon them, the Resistance fractures from within. Sidious smiled, his yellow Sith eyes gleaming with ancient malevolence. The game was evolving. Hunt had adapted his tactics. Now the Empire would adapt in turn. And in the end, the dark side always won. It was simply a matter of patience. The holographic display in the Andromeda's war room showed a galaxy slowly turning red. Dylan stood before it, watching Imperial influence spread like a bloodstain across star systems. 2 weeks since the communication relay strikes, and the Empire's response had been swift and brutal. Not direct retaliation against the Resistance, that would have been predictable, even manageable. Instead, the Empire had shifted tactics in a way that made Dylan's strategic instincts scream warnings. They're targeting civilian populations, Senator Bail Organa said, his holographic form showing strain. The past weeks had aged him visibly. Not military installations, not resistance cells. Civilian populations in systems that showed sympathy to our cause. Gorman, Chandrila's outer colonies, even parts of Corellia. Mass arrests, public executions of seditionists, and propaganda broadcasts showing what happens to worlds that harbor rebels. The doctrine of fear, Obi-Wan said quietly. He'd seen this tactic during the Clone Wars, though never implemented with such systematic ruthlessness. Make the cost of resistance so high that populations turn on rebels rather than face imperial reprisal. It's working, Mon Mothma added, her voice heavy with political realism. 3 systems that had been providing us intelligence have gone silent. 2 resistance cells we'd contacted have dissolved. The populations aren't becoming loyal to the Empire, they're becoming terrified of being associated with us. Dylan's hands clenched behind his back. This was the nightmare scenario he tried to prevent, an enemy that understood asymmetric warfare and had adapted to make the resistance itself the weapon turned against civilian populations. How many dead? He asked quietly. Confirmed. Approximately 15,000 across 6 systems, Bale replied. Projected if this continues? Millions. The Empire is making examples, Captain Hunt. Every world we've helped, every system that's sheltered Jedi survivors, every population center that expressed support for the Rebel Alliance, they're all being systematically punished. And they're broadcasting it, Anakin said, his mechanical hand clenching rhythmically. Holonet channels across the galaxy showing public trials, mass deportations to labor camps, families torn apart because someone was suspected of rebel sympathies. They're making sure everyone knows the cost of opposing the Empire. Ahsoka spoke up, her young voice carrying horror. There are children in those labor camps. Younglings whose only crime was having parents who opposed Palpatine's emergency powers. The Empire is teaching the galaxy that even families aren't safe from their reach. The silence that followed was profound. Every person in the war room, physical and holographic, understood the strategic calculus at play. The Empire wasn't just fighting the resistance, it was fighting the idea of resistance, demonstrating that opposition brought consequences so terrible that even sympathizers would abandon the cause. We have to respond, Anakin said finally. We can't let the Empire murder innocents without. Without what? Tyr interrupted, his Nietzschean pragmatism cutting through sentiment. We attack Imperial forces, they escalate reprisals. We try to defend civilian populations, we spread ourselves so thin we become ineffective. This is exactly what they want, for us to abandon successful guerrilla tactics and return to conventional warfare where their numerical superiority matters. So we do nothing. Anakin's voice rose with barely contained rage. We let innocents die because defending them is strategically inadvisable. I'm saying, Tyr replied coolly, that emotional responses to calculated provocations are how wars are lost. The Empire is baiting you, General Skywalker. They want you angry, want you making decisions based on guilt rather than strategy. The Commonwealth fell because we allowed emotions to override tactical necessity. Anakin's hand moved toward his lightsaber, and the temperature in the war room seemed to drop several degrees. Obi-Wan placed a restraining hand on his former Padawan's shoulder, but his own expression showed he sympathized with Anakin's fury. Enough, Dylan said, his command voice cutting through the rising tension. Tyr's not wrong about the strategic calculation, but Anakin's right that we can't simply ignore civilian casualties. The question isn't whether we respond, it's how we respond in a way that doesn't play into the Empire's hands. And how exactly do we do that? Bika asked. The Empire has effectively infinite resources and is willing to commit atrocities to pressure us. We're one ship and scattered allies. What response doesn't either play into their strategy or make us complicit in the deaths we could have prevented? Dylan studied the galactic display, his mind working through scenarios with the speed of decades spent in tactical command. Every conventional option led to disaster. Direct intervention spread them too thin, ignoring the reprisals destroyed their moral authority, escalating violence triggered even worse imperial response. They needed a third option. Something the Empire wasn't expecting, something that changed the strategic equation entirely. Master Yoda, Dylan said slowly, an idea beginning to form. You said the Force connects all living things across the galaxy. Is there a way to use that connection to communicate? To reach populations the Empire is targeting and coordinate evacuations before Imperial forces arrive? Yoda's ears lifted slightly. Interesting question, this is. The Force, individual communication allows, yes. Master and Padawan, across great distances speak can, when bonded they are. But mass communication? To populations entire? Attempted, this has not been. Dangerous, it might be. But possible? Perhaps, Yoda said cautiously. If many Jedi, together worked. Pooled their strength in the Force, amplified by meditation and focus. Send warning, we might. Tell threatened populations to evacuate before Imperial forces arrive. That's only half the solution, Mon Mothma pointed out. Warning people is meaningless if they have nowhere to go. The Empire controls hyperspace lanes, monitors refugee movements, and tracks ships leaving targeted systems. Even if we warn them, how do they escape? The Andromeda can't evacuate millions, Bika said. We're a warship, not a colony transport. We'd need a fleet of civilian vessels, protected hyperspace routes, and safe haven worlds willing to shelter refugees. Then we build that fleet, Bail Organa said, his political mind engaging. There are systems in the Outer Rim, neutral worlds, independent colonies, corporate holdings that resent imperial overreach. Some would be willing to shelter refugees if we could guarantee protection and provide resources for their support. You're proposing an underground railroad, Dylan said, recognizing the historical parallel. A network that moves endangered populations from Imperial targeted systems to safe havens before the Empire can implement reprisals. It would require massive coordination, Mon Mothma said, but her voice carried possibility rather than skepticism. Sympathetic ship captains, resistance cells providing local intelligence, Jedi giving force-based warnings, and the Andromeda providing protection for the most vulnerable transports. And resources, Senator Organa added. Alderaan can provide financial support and supplies. Other sympathetic core worlds might contribute if we keep their involvement deniable. The infrastructure exists, we're talking about repurposing civilian logistics networks for humanitarian purposes. Dylan felt the pieces clicking together. This changes our strategic posture entirely. Instead of fighting the Empire's military forces, we undermine their terror tactics by proving populations can escape Imperial reach. Every successful evacuation is proof the Empire isn't omnipotent. And it denies them their primary weapon, Obi-Wan added. Fear only works when populations feel trapped. If we give them hope and actual means of escape, the Empire's reprisals become empty gestures. It won't save everyone, Anakin said, the anger in his voice transforming into grim determination. The Empire will still catch some populations before we can evacuate them. Some systems won't trust us enough to flee their homes. No, Dylan agreed. But some is better than none. And every person we save is someone the Empire can't use as an example. This isn't about winning conventional battles, it's about proving resistance is possible, that the Empire's power has limits, that hope still exists. Tyr leaned back, his expression showing grudging respect. It's still resource-intensive and strategically risky. But it's better than the alternatives. Though I should point out, once we commit to this, the Empire will adapt again. They'll target the Underground Railroad, hunt the safe haven worlds, turn refugee movements into traps. Then we stay ahead of them, Dylan said. We've proven we can outthink Imperial tactics. We just have to keep evolving faster than they can counter. Ambitious, this plan is, Yoda said, but his tone carried approval. But necessary. During the Clone Wars, focus on battles we did. Forget the people behind the battles, we did. Learn from this mistake, we must. Protect the people first, fight the Empire second. The Jedi meditation chamber aboard the Andromeda had been hastily constructed, a quiet space where Force users could center themselves, away from the ship's technological hum. Now, 17 Jedi survivors sat in a circle, their presence in the Force creating a resonance that even non-Force sensitives could feel as a subtle pressure in the air. Master Yoda sat at the circle's center, his eyes closed in deep concentration. Around him, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, and 13 other survivors opened themselves to the Force, their individual presences merging into something greater than their sum. Obi-Wan had participated in Jedi battle meditation before, the technique where multiple Jedi coordinated their Force presence to enhance allies' effectiveness in combat. But this was different. This wasn't about enhancing warriors. This was about reaching across the galaxy to populations that didn't even know they were in danger. Focus, you must, Yoda's voice echoed through both physical space and the Force itself. Not on yourselves. Not on the Empire. On the people, those in danger, those afraid, those who need warning and hope. Feel them through the Force. Connect to their lives, their fear, their desire for survival. Obi-Wan extended his awareness, letting the Force flow through him rather than trying to control it. He felt the 17 Jedi as points of light, their presence merging, amplifying. And beyond them, spreading across the galaxy like a web of living energy, he sensed, everyone. Trillions of lives, each a unique presence in the Force. Most were faint, barely perceptible flickers. But some burned brighter. Those in immediate danger, those whose fear and desperation made them stand out like beacons in the cosmic web. On Gorman, a young mother clutched her child, terrified by rumors that Imperial forces were coming to arrest seditionists. She'd never opposed the Empire, but her neighbor had been accused, and in the Empire's brutal efficiency, entire city blocks were being rounded up for questioning that often ended in labor camps or worse. Through the Force, she felt something. A presence, warm and protective, carrying a message that wasn't quite words but nonetheless communicated clearly, you are in danger. Pack essentials. Go to the old starport. Help is coming. She didn't understand how she knew this, didn't question the certainty that filled her. She simply acted, grabbing her child and belongings, rushing to warn neighbors, spreading the message that somehow everyone heard and believed. Across Gorman, across 6 other worlds where Imperial reprisals were imminent, populations felt the warning. Not everyone heard it, the Force touched most strongly those already sensitive or those whose fear made them receptive. But enough heard. Enough to matter. In the meditation chamber, Yoda felt the strain of maintaining this unprecedented Force technique. 17 Jedi, even working in concert, were pushing the limits of what they could sustain. The Force was infinite, but their capacity to channel it was not. Enough, Yoda said, his voice carrying exhaustion. Withdraw, we must. Before damage to ourselves we do. The circle of Jedi slowly opened their eyes, each looking pale and drained. Obi-Wan felt like he'd run a marathon. Physically fine but spiritually exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with the body. Did it work? Ahsoka asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll know soon, Anakin said. If populations on those worlds start evacuating before Imperial forces arrive, we'll know the warning reached them. On Gorman, 15,000 people converged on the old starport, a facility that hadn't seen regular use since the Clone Wars ended. They came carrying whatever they could, driven by warnings they couldn't explain but absolutely believed. Fear mixed with hope, desperation tempered by the sense that something was coming to help them. The Andromeda Ascendant arrived first, its massive form descending through atmosphere with shocking speed for a vessel its size. But it wasn't alone. Behind it came 37 civilian transports, freighters, passenger ships, even a few outdated colony vessels, all coordinated by the Underground Railroad network Senator Organa and Mon Mothma had rapidly assembled. Dylan stood on the Andromeda's bridge, watching the evacuation unfold with military precision. Harper, what's our timeline before Imperial forces arrive? Best estimate? 4 hours. They're mobilizing a garrison force from the sector capital, but they're not expecting resistance. Standard occupation formation, moving at cruising speed. Plenty of time, Dylan said. Rami, coordinate with the civilian transports. I want everyone who's responded to the warning evacuated in 2 hours. That gives us a safety margin if the Empire arrives early. On the ground, Obi-Wan and Anakin directed the evacuation with practiced efficiency. Families boarded transports in organized groups, belongings were loaded with speed that sacrificed care for necessity, and Jedi moved through the crowds offering reassurance and managing panic. This is working, Anakin said, watching a transport lift off with 300 refugees aboard. We're actually doing it. Don't celebrate yet, Obi-Wan cautioned. This is one world, one evacuation. The Empire will adapt once they realize what we're doing. Then we adapt faster, Anakin replied, echoing Dylan's earlier words. For the first time since Order 66, we're not just surviving, we're actually helping people. That has to count for something. 2 hours later, the last transport cleared Gorman's atmosphere, carrying refugees to safe haven worlds in the Outer Rim. Behind them, the planet's starport stood empty except for a single holographic message left for Imperial forces. You cannot terrorize those we protect. You cannot threaten those we shelter. For every population you target, we will offer escape. For every life you threaten, we will provide hope. The Rebel Alliance stands between tyranny and the innocent. And we will not yield. When Imperial forces arrived 4 hours after the Andromeda's departure, they found empty streets, abandoned homes, and 15,000 seditionists vanished without a trace. The message played on loop, a declaration that the Empire's terror tactics had been countered before they could even be implemented. In the Imperial Garrison Commander's report to Coruscant, he struggled to explain how an entire city's population had disappeared with apparent advance warning of Imperial arrival. How they'd been evacuated by a fleet of ships that appeared and vanished before orbital sensors even registered their presence. How the Resistance had just demonstrated that the Empire's power to terrorize populations had been neutralized. On Coruscant, Grand Moff Tarkin read the report with growing fury, though his expression remained controlled. He stood before Emperor Palpatine's throne, presenting the strategic disaster with professional efficiency. 7 worlds, Your Majesty. 7 population centers where we planned reprisal operations, and in every case, the targets evacuated hours before our forces arrived. Total escaped population, approximately 50,000 individuals. They were warned somehow, coordinated somehow, and evacuated with a speed and efficiency that suggests advanced planning. The Force, Palpatine said quietly. The Jedi used their Force connection to warn populations. Clever. I'd underestimated their capacity for adaptation. We can adjust tactics, Your Majesty. If the Jedi can warn populations through the Force, we can move faster, strike without warning, prevent evacuations. No, Palpatine interrupted. That's reactive thinking, Grand Moff. Hunt and his Jedi allies have changed the strategic equation. We respond by changing it again, but more fundamentally. Your Majesty. Palpatine's yellow eyes gleamed with calculation that spanned decades of planning. We've been treating the Resistance as a military problem. It's not. It's a political problem. Hunt is winning because he's offering something we haven't countered, hope. Populations believe the Resistance can protect them from Imperial reprisal. So we demonstrate they can't. So we demonstrate that resistance brings worse consequences than submission, Palpatine corrected. Grand Moff, I want you to identify a world. Not a minor colony or outer rim settlement. A significant world, millions of inhabitants, established government, economic importance to surrounding systems. A world that has remained neutral in our conflict but has shown resistant sympathies. Tarkin felt cold realization. You want to make an example. Not of a population that harbored rebels, but of an entire world. The Empire cannot protect individual populations from rebel evacuation, Palpatine agreed. But the Empire can demonstrate what happens to worlds that remain neutral rather than actively supporting us. We will give one world, one significant, visible world, a choice: actively assist in hunting rebels, or face consequences that make our previous reprisals look merciful. And when they refuse, then we implement consequences so severe that every neutral world in the galaxy sees what awaits them if they don't choose sides. Fear is most effective, Grand Moff, when it's comprehensive. We've been making small examples. It's time for a large one. Tarkin's tactical mind immediately began calculating targets. Alderaan would send the strongest message. Core world, ancient civilization, openly sympathetic to resistance causes though they've maintained official neutrality. Too significant, Palpatine said. Attacking Alderaan risks unifying opposition against us. No, we need a world important enough to matter, but not so important that destroying it creates martyrs. What about Caamas? Tarkin considered. Caamas, a peaceful world known for its philosophers and moral traditions, its population had been vocal critics of imperial policies without actually supporting armed resistance. Significant enough to be noticed, vulnerable enough to be destroyed, and ideologically opposed enough that their destruction could be framed as eliminating seditious ideology. An excellent choice, Your Majesty. Then prepare the operation, Grand Moff. Give Caamas 1 week to declare absolute loyalty to the Empire and begin actively assisting Imperial security operations. When they refuse, and they will refuse, their moral principles won't allow cooperation. We will implement consequences that define a new era of Imperial power. What consequences, Your Majesty? Palpatine smiled, and the expression carried such malevolence that even Tarkin, architect of the doctrine of fear, felt momentary unease. Total atmospheric incineration. Leave the world lifeless but intact. A monument to the cost of opposing the Empire. And Grand Moff? Make certain the Rebel Alliance knows this is their fault. That their evacuations, their resistance, their hope, all of it led directly to Caamas burning. Turn their victory into their greatest failure. Precisely. Hunt thinks he's winning by saving individuals. We'll show him what his victories actually cost. Tarkin departed to implement the Emperor's orders, and Darth Sidious sat alone in his throne room, contemplating the strategy that would break the Resistance's spirit more effectively than any military victory. The dark side didn't win through strength. It won through corruption, turning light to darkness, hope to despair, victory to ashes. Captain Hunt and his Jedi allies had just won their first significant success against Imperial terror tactics. It would be their last. The Andromeda Ascendant hung in deep space at the edge of the Caamas system, its sensors monitoring a world that had, for thousands of years, represented the galaxy's moral conscience. Caamas was beautiful from orbit, blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in atmospheric patterns that suggested peace and stability. Its cities were elegant rather than imposing, its civilization built on philosophy and ethics rather than military might. The Caamasi people were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom, their commitment to non-violence, and their moral clarity that had guided Republic policy for generations. In 1 week, the Empire would demand they abandon everything they believed in or face annihilation. This is a trap, Tyr said bluntly, studying the tactical displays that showed Imperial fleet movements. The Empire is baiting us. They know we'll try to evacuate Caamas, and they're positioning forces to intercept. 6 Star Destroyers in neighboring systems, ready to jump the moment we commit. They want us spread thin, exhausted, fighting on their terms. It's worse than a trap, Harper added, his voice carrying unusual gravity. I've been monitoring Imperial communications. They're not just positioning military forces, they're preparing public broadcasts, holonet transmissions, propaganda that will frame Caamas's destruction as the Resistance's fault. They're going to tell the galaxy that our evacuations forced them to escalate, that blood is on our hands. Dylan stood before the viewscreen, watching Caamas rotate peacefully below, and felt the weight of impossible choices settling over him like a physical burden. He'd faced no-win scenarios before, during the Nietzschean uprising, during the Commonwealth's collapse, during 3 centuries of trying to restore a civilization from ashes. But this felt different. This felt personal in ways that transcended strategic calculation. Population? Dylan asked quietly. 2 billion, Andromeda replied, her avatar's expression showing something that might have been sorrow if artificial intelligence could truly feel such emotions. Concentrated in 7 major cities and hundreds of smaller settlements. Captain, even with our entire underground railroad network, we couldn't evacuate more than 5% of the population before the Empire's deadline. And if we try, we expose our civilian transport fleet to Imperial interception. So we're choosing, Anakin said, his voice tight with barely contained rage. 2 billion lives, and we're having a tactical discussion about what percentage we can save while abandoning the rest to die. We're not abandoning them, Obi-Wan said, though his voice carried little conviction. We're making the hardest decision Resistance leaders face. Protecting those we can while accepting we can't save everyone. That's what Palpatine wants us to believe, Ahsoka interjected. The young Togruta had been quiet throughout the meeting, but now her words cut through the despair like a blade. He wants us paralyzed by guilt, making choices between impossible options, accepting that some deaths are inevitable. But what if we reject the entire premise? Explain, Dylan said, hearing something in her voice that sparked his tactical instincts. The Empire is giving Caamas 1 week to comply with their demands. Essentially to become an Imperial client state, informing on Resistance sympathizers, hosting Imperial garrison forces, abandoning their principles of neutrality and peace. They're assuming Caamas will refuse because Caamasi philosophy makes compliance impossible. Which they will, Senator Bail Organa said via holographic transmission. I've known the Caamasi leadership for years. They're incapable of the moral compromise the Empire demands. Their entire civilization is built on ethical principles they've maintained for millennia. They'll choose death before betrayal of those principles. Then what if, Ahsoka continued, we help them choose a third option? Not compliance, not martyrdom, but something the Empire hasn't anticipated. You're suggesting we find a way to save all of them, Anakin said, understanding dawning. Not 5%. All 2 billion. That's logistically impossible, Tyr stated flatly. We'd need hundreds of transports, protected hyperspace routes, safe havens capable of sheltering billions, and most critically, time we don't have. Impossible with conventional methods, Dylan said slowly, his mind beginning to work through scenarios that days ago he would have dismissed as fantasy. But we're not limited to conventional methods anymore. Rami, hypothetical scenario. Could we move an entire planet's population using a combination of our technology and force-assisted coordination? Andromeda's processing cores engaged at speeds that would have melted Republic computers. Theoretically possible, but the logistical complexity is staggering. We would need, 1, massive civilian fleet far exceeding our current underground railroad capacity. 2, simultaneous evacuation from multiple points to prevent bottlenecks. 3, force-based coordination on a scale never attempted. 4, a way to prevent Imperial interdiction of evacuation routes. And 5, this would require revealing the full extent of our capabilities to the Empire. Every tactical advantage we've been preserving. So we'd win this battle but potentially lose the war, Bika said. Burn all our advantages to save one world, leaving us vulnerable for every engagement after. The conference room fell silent as everyone processed the impossible calculation. 2 billion lives on one side, the entire Resistance's future effectiveness on the other. Strategic necessity versus moral imperative. The kind of choice that defined leaders and haunted them forever. Master Yoda's eyes opened slowly, and when he spoke, his ancient voice carried absolute certainty. Save them, we must. All of them. Whatever the cost to our tactical position, whatever advantages we reveal, worth it, 2 billion lives are. Master Yoda, Bail Organa protested gently, I understand the moral clarity, but if we expose our full capabilities here. Then expose them, we will, Yoda interrupted firmly. A question, I ask you all, why do we fight? To defeat the Empire? To restore the Republic? Or to protect innocent life from tyranny? If the second or third, then our purpose becomes meaningless the moment we sacrifice billions for strategic advantage. The Jedi way, Obi-Wan said quietly, understanding. We've been fighting like soldiers, thinking like generals. But we're Jedi first. Our purpose isn't to win wars, it's to protect life and defend those who cannot defend themselves. Even if it costs us future battles. Mon Mothma asked, her political instincts warring with her moral principles. Especially then, Yoda said. A resistance built on sacrificing innocence for strategic gain, no different from the Empire becomes. Justify any atrocity with greater good reasoning, tyrants do. If match their methods we do, then already lost we have, regardless of military victory. Dylan felt something shift inside him, a burden he'd been carrying since the Commonwealth fell, the weight of trying to win an unwinnable war through perfect strategic calculation. Yoda was right. He'd been fighting to restore the Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth hadn't been perfect. It had made compromises, accepted necessary evils, and eventually collapsed under the weight of those compromises. Maybe the resistance could be something better. Maybe it could fight without becoming what it opposed. Then we save them all, Dylan said, his voice carrying command certainty. Every last Caamasi on that planet. We reveal our full capabilities, we burn every tactical advantage we've been preserving, and we show the galaxy exactly what the resistance stands for. Captain, Tyr said, his voice carrying warning rather than argument, you understand what you're proposing? This commits us to total war with the Empire. No more hiding, no more guerrilla tactics. We become the visible symbol of resistance, and the Empire will hunt us with every resource they possess. I know, Dylan replied. But maybe that's what we should have been from the beginning. Not ghosts striking from shadows, but a light that refuses to be extinguished. A proof that hope exists and tyranny can be opposed. Anakin's mechanical hand clenched, and for the first time since Order 66, something like hope flickered in his expression. We'll need every ship in the Underground Railroad. Every Jedi survivor. Every resistance cell that can contribute. This isn't just an evacuation. It's a declaration that we won't accept the Empire's rules anymore. Then we have 1 week to organize the largest evacuation in galactic history, Obi-Wan said. Captain Hunt, what do you need from us? Dylan turned to face the assembled leaders, physical and holographic, of a resistance that was about to bet everything on an impossible operation. Everything, Dylan said simply. Master Yoda, I need your Jedi coordinating evacuation through the Force on a scale you said was dangerous. Senator Organa, Mon Mothma. I need every ship you can commandeer, beg, borrow, or steal. Anakin, Obi-Wan, I need you organizing ground operations on Caamas, preparing population centers for simultaneous evacuation. And Rami, I need you to calculate the logistics for moving 2 billion beings off-world in the window before the Empire's deadline. That's a planet-wide evacuation in 7 days, Andromeda said. The largest civilian operation in recorded history. Then I guess we're making history, Dylan replied. Because 2 billion people are counting on us to do the impossible. On Caamas, in the Hall of Enlightenment where Caamasi leaders had deliberated for thousands of years, elders received the Rebel Alliance's message with expressions of serene acceptance. Elder Ilenikit Kla, a Caamasi philosopher whose wisdom had guided the planet through the Clone Wars and the Republic's transformation, read the transmission from Captain Dylan Hunt with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. They offer evacuation, Ilenik said to the assembled council of elders. The Rebel Alliance proposes to move our entire civilization off-world rather than see us comply with Imperial demands or face destruction. An impossible undertaking, Elder Sorish said. 2 billion souls, 7 days, and Imperial forces waiting to intercept. This Captain Hunt offers hope, but hope built on fantasy serves no purpose. Does it not? Ilenik replied gently. We Caamasi have built our civilization on principles that others call fantasy. Nonviolence in a galaxy at war. Ethics in political systems built on compromise. Peace in the face of aggression. If we abandon hope because the task seems impossible, we abandon the very philosophy that defines us. You're suggesting we accept their offer? Another elder asked. Place our entire civilization's fate in the hands of off-world rebels we barely know? I'm suggesting, Ilenik said, his voice carrying the moral clarity the Caamasi were known for, that the Rebel Alliance's offer reveals what the Empire's ultimatum conceals. The Empire demands we choose between principles and survival, a false choice designed to corrupt or destroy us. The Alliance offers a third path, maintain our principles and survive, though the cost and difficulty and danger is immense. But is it possible? The Force will be with us, a new voice said. Obi-Wan Kenobi entered the Hall of Enlightenment, his Jedi robes dusty from travel but his presence carrying the authority of someone who'd fought for the same principles the Caamasi held sacred. Master Yoda and 17 Jedi will coordinate your evacuation through the Force. The Andromeda Ascendant, a ship more powerful than anything the Empire can field, will provide protection. And hundreds of civilian captains are volunteering to risk their lives transporting your people to safety. Why? Sorish asked simply. Why would off-worlders risk everything for a planet that has maintained neutrality? We haven't supported the Rebel Alliance militarily. We've been philosophical allies at best. Why do they care what happens to us? Because that's what resistance means, Obi-Wan replied. Not just fighting the Empire, but proving there's an alternative. You asked why off-worlders would risk everything for Caamas. Because if we let the Empire destroy civilizations like yours, civilizations built on peace and ethics, then what exactly are we fighting for? The Rebel Alliance needs Caamas to survive, not as a military asset but as a reminder that peace and principles are worth fighting for. Ilenik felt tears, rare for a Caamasi, forming in his ancient eyes. For 3 months, he'd watched the galaxy transform under Imperial rule, had seen worlds that once valued wisdom now embracing authoritarianism out of fear. The Rebel Alliance's offer wasn't just evacuation. It was validation that everything the Caamasi had built, every principle they'd maintained, still mattered. Then we accept, Ilenik said, his voice carrying the weight of speaking for 2 billion souls. We will prepare our people for evacuation. We will trust in the Force, in the Rebel Alliance, and in the hope that principles are worth preserving even at impossible cost. We have 7 days, Obi-Wan said. And we're going to need every hour. Master Kenobi to Andromeda. Inform Captain Hunt that Caamas accepts. Begin Operation Sanctuary. High above Caamas, aboard the Commonwealth warship that had become the Resistance's beating heart, Dylan Hunt received the confirmation and felt the weight of 2 billion lives settle onto his shoulders. He'd commanded fleets during the Nietzschean uprising. He'd made decisions that cost thousands of lives. But never had he attempted something this ambitious, this visible, this impossible. All stations, this is the captain, Dylan said, his voice carrying across every deck of the Andromeda Ascendant. We have 1 week to pull off the largest evacuation in galactic history. We're going to save every single Caamasi on that planet, and we're going to do it in a way that shows the Empire and the entire galaxy what the Rebel Alliance stands for. We stand for the belief that innocent life matters more than strategic advantage. We stand for the principle that hope is worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. We stand for the idea that tyranny, no matter how powerful, can be opposed by those willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. In 7 days, the Empire expects to either enslave or destroy an entire civilization. Instead, they're going to watch 2 billion people escape their grasp. They're going to witness proof that their power isn't absolute, that their threats can be defied, and that the Rebel Alliance doesn't accept their rules. This is going to be hard. This is going to be dangerous. And when it's over, we'll have revealed every capability we've been hiding, exposed every tactical advantage we've preserved. But 2 billion lives are worth that cost. The soul of this resistance is worth that cost. Stations, prepare for Operation Sanctuary. Let's show the galaxy what hope looks like. Across the ship, crew members moved with renewed purpose. This wasn't just another mission. This was the moment that would define what they were fighting for. On Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine received reports that the Rebel Alliance was mobilizing for a massive operation at Caamas, and he smiled. Let them come, he thought. Let them expose themselves, reveal their full capabilities, commit everything to one operation. And then we'll show them what happens when hope is crushed completely. The stage was set. The Empire's trap was baited. And the Rebel Alliance was about to walk into the most visible confrontation since the Clone Wars ended. In 7 days, the galaxy would learn whether hope or tyranny was stronger. Day 1 of Operation Sanctuary began with a small miracle that would be replicated 2 billion times over the next week. On Caamas, in the city of Revaya, a shopkeeper named Tellan stood in the street watching a steady stream of ships descend from the sky. They weren't military vessels, most were aging freighters, converted colony transports, even refurbished passenger liners that should have been scrapped decades ago. They bore no imperial markings, no separatist insignia, just the hastily painted symbol of the Rebel Alliance, a starbird rising against a crimson sun. Attention, citizens of Revaya, a voice echoed across the city's public address system. It was young, female, carrying authority despite obvious exhaustion. This is Commander Ahsoka Tano of the Rebel Alliance. We're beginning coordinated evacuation. Please proceed to designated gathering points with essential belongings only. We will transport you to safety, but we must move quickly. Tellan clutched his daughter's hand and joined the orderly line of Caamasi moving toward the nearest transport. His species was known for patience and rational thought, qualities that were saving countless lives now as 2 billion people began the largest migration in galactic history without panic or chaos. Papa, will we ever come home? His daughter asked, her large eyes reflecting the burning certainty that Caamasi children inherited genetically, the memnii, memories of profound emotional moments that could be shared with others through touch. I don't know, Tellan admitted. But we'll be alive to hope for it. That's what the Rebel Alliance has given us, hope, when the Empire offered only destruction or slavery. Aboard the Andromeda Ascendant, Andromeda's avatar stood in the war room surrounded by holographic displays showing evacuation progress across all 7 major Caamasi cities simultaneously. Each display was a logistical nightmare of coordination, ship arrivals, population movements, resource allocation, hyperspace route management. It was the kind of multivariable problem that would have overwhelmed any organic mind. Fortunately, Andromeda wasn't organic. Sector 7, Transport Group Gamma is approaching capacity, she reported, her processing cores managing 3,000 simultaneous communication channels. Redirecting overflow to Transport Group Delta. Harper, I need you to recalculate hyperspace routes for the evening departure wave. We're getting more refugees per transport than projected, which means fuel consumption is exceeding initial estimates. Already on it, Harper's voice came back, the engineer working at speeds that pushed even his considerable abilities. Though I gotta say, Rami, this is insane. We're choreographing the largest civilian operation in history with 1 week's planning. One miscalculation and we could have ships colliding in atmosphere or running out of fuel mid-jump. Then we won't miscalculate, Andromeda replied with synthetic certainty. Dylan, ground teams report 83% evacuation efficiency in the first 6 hours. At current rates, we'll clear Revia and 2 smaller cities by end of day 2. Dylan stood at the tactical display, watching the operation unfold with the focus of someone who knew that even small mistakes at this scale meant lives lost. What's our Imperial activity? 6 Star Destroyers holding position in neighboring systems, exactly as Tyr predicted. They're observing but not interdicting, yet. They want us fully committed before they spring whatever trap Palpatine has planned. Then we give them what they expect, Dylan said. A resistance pouring everything into one operation, spread thin, vulnerable. Let them think we're making a strategic mistake. Aren't we? Bika asked from her helm station. Boss, I love the moral clarity here, but Tyr's right, once we reveal our full capabilities, the Empire adapts. We're burning 3 months of tactical advantages for one victory. One victory that saves 2 billion lives and proves the Empire isn't omnipotent, Dylan replied. Bika, I've fought wars where we made every strategically correct decision and still lost because we forgot what we were fighting for. The Commonwealth fell because we became so focused on winning that we lost sight of why victory mattered. And if this operation fails? If the Empire catches us spread thin and destroys half the evacuation fleet? Dylan's expression hardened. Then we make sure it doesn't fail. On Caamas's surface, Obi-Wan Kenobi coordinated ground operations from the Hall of Enlightenment, which had been transformed into an evacuation command center. Holographic displays showed population movements across the planet, transport capacities, and, most critically, the timeline until the Empire's deadline. 6 days, 17 hours remaining. Master Kenobi, we have a situation in the southern continent, a Caamasi coordinator reported. 3 settlements, approximately 50,000 beings, are refusing evacuation. They're saying that fleeing represents capitulation to Imperial intimidation. Obi-Wan felt frustration flash through him, then deliberately released it to the Force. The Caamasi were peaceful, but they were also principled to the point of stubbornness. Some would choose martyrdom over what they perceived as submission. I'll speak with them, Obi-Wan said. Have a transport standing by, just in case I can convince them. 20 minutes later, Obi-Wan stood in the settlement of Yh-Tan, facing 50,000 Caamasi who'd chosen to remain. Their spokesman, an elderly philosopher named Dravan, met him with the serene expression of someone at peace with dying for principle. Master Jedi, we appreciate the Rebel Alliance's efforts, Dravan said. But we cannot flee. Our ancestors built this settlement 8,000 years ago. To abandon it because the Empire makes threats would validate their power through fear. It's not capitulation, Obi-Wan said gently. It's preservation. Your civilization, your wisdom, your principles, these matter more than any piece of ground. If you die here, what does that prove except that the Empire can murder those who oppose them? It proves, Dravan replied, that some things are worth dying for. That principles matter more than survival. But don't your principles include preserving life? Obi-Wan pressed. The Caamasi are known throughout the galaxy for valuing all living things. How does dying serve that value? How does letting the Empire erase your wisdom from the galaxy honor the principles you've maintained for millennia? Dravan hesitated, and Obi-Wan felt the Force shift around them, not manipulation, just the natural current of truth-finding resonance. You're asking us to choose between 2 principles we hold sacred, Dravan said slowly. Preserving life, and refusing to submit to tyranny through fear. No, Obi-Wan corrected. I'm asking you to see that those principles aren't in conflict. Survival isn't submission, it's defiance. Every Caamasi who escapes Imperial destruction is proof that tyranny cannot erase what you represent. The Empire wants you dead or enslaved because your very existence challenges their authority. By surviving, by maintaining your principles in exile, you hurt them more than martyrdom ever could. And we'll never return home, Dravan said, his voice carrying the weight of that loss. Perhaps not, Obi-Wan admitted. But your children will carry Caamasi wisdom to new worlds. Your philosophy will influence systems the Empire hasn't touched. Your survival ensures that in 50 years, 100 years, when the Empire finally falls, and it will fall, Caamasi principles will help rebuild what tyranny destroyed. Dravan stood silent for a long moment, consulting with the Force in ways that even Jedi couldn't fully understand. The Caamasi had their own connection to the cosmic energy, their own interpretation of its guidance. Finally, he nodded. We will evacuate. Not in submission, but in defiance. We survived to witness the Empire's eventual fall. 50,000 Caamasi began boarding transports, and Obi-Wan felt relief wash through him. One more population saved. One more piece of wisdom preserved. But 6 days remained, and 2 billion souls still needed rescuing. In the meditation chamber aboard the Andromeda, Master Yoda sat at the center of a force resonance that grew stronger each day. The 17 Jedi survivors had been joined by 5 more rescued during evacuation operations, 22 Jedi now, meditating in shifts, maintaining a constant force presence that coordinated the massive operation. Through the force, Yoda felt every transport departure, every family boarding ships, every moment of fear transforming into hope. He felt the Caamasi people, their serene acceptance of displacement, their trust in strangers risking everything to save them, their faith that principles mattered more than comfort. But he also felt the darkness gathering. 6 Star Destroyers in neighboring systems. Palpatine's malevolent presence like a storm on Coruscant. The weight of Imperial military might preparing to spring a trap that would destroy not just the evacuation but the Resistance's credibility forever. Master Yoda, are you sensing this? Anakin asked. He'd been meditating beside the ancient Jedi, his own force presence troubled by premonitions of violence. Feel it, I do, Yoda confirmed. The Empire, waiting they are. Patient, Sidious is. Wants us committed, exposed, vulnerable. Then strike, he will. So what do we do? What we must, Yoda said simply. Save those we can. Accept that surprise, we will face. Trust in the Force, we do. And trust in Captain Hunt's tactical brilliance, we also do. That's not very reassuring, Master. Reassurance, CQ. Yoda's eyes opened, ancient and knowing. Young Skywalker, learned you have not. The Force, guarantees it offers not. Shows possibilities, it does. Paths we might take, consequences we might face. But certainty? Comfort? These, the Force does not provide. Only guidance. Only connection to something greater than ourselves. And what's the Force telling you about this operation? Yoda's ears drooped slightly. That succeed or fail, change the galaxy this will. That reveal ourselves completely, we are doing. That after this, hide we cannot. Visible we become. Either a beacon of hope that inspires resistance across 1,000 worlds, or a cautionary tale about the cost of opposing the Empire. So everything depends on the next 6 days. Everything, Yoda agreed, always depends on now. Past is fixed. Future is uncertain. Only this moment, truly exists. So this moment, do our best and we must. Trust that enough it will be, we do. Anakin absorbed this, feeling the truth in Yoda's words even as his tactical mind screamed about impossible odds and inadequate planning time. But perhaps that was the lesson, sometimes, you had to act on faith rather than certainty, on principle rather than guaranteed success. Then let's make this moment count, Anakin said, returning to meditation and extending his Force presence to help coordinate the thousands of transports moving Caamasi refugees off-world. Day 3 arrived, and with it, the first test of Imperial patience. A transport convoy carrying 300,000 Caamasi refugees was intercepted at the edge of the system by an Imperial patrol, 2 Arquitens-class light cruisers, well within their rights to inspect civilian traffic but clearly testing how the Rebel Alliance would respond to interference. The Andromeda Ascendant responded by materializing from hyperspace directly between the Imperial vessels and the refugee convoy with timing so precise that the Star Wars galaxy's slower-than-light sensors barely registered its arrival before it was in position. Dylan's voice came through on all channels, carrying the absolute certainty of someone who wouldn't be moved. Imperial vessels, you are interfering with humanitarian evacuation operations. Withdraw immediately or be disabled. The Imperial captain, A career officer named Lennox who'd spent 3 years fighting separatists and now found himself facing something far more unsettling, stared at the massive Commonwealth warship that had appeared from nowhere. Unknown vessel, we are exercising legitimate Imperial authority to inspect civilian traffic. Stand down or we will interpret your interference as hostile action. Captain Lennox, Dylan replied, and Lennox felt cold realization that this captain from another universe knew his name, had probably analyzed his service record, understood exactly who he was and how he'd react. You're not here to inspect traffic. You're here to test our resolve, to see if we'll let you interfere with evacuation operations. The answer is no. You have 60 seconds to withdraw before I demonstrate why threatening civilian convoys under our protection is a career-ending mistake. Lennox looked at his tactical officer, who shook his head. Their weapons couldn't even get target lock on the Andromeda, and every intelligence briefing said this ship had destroyed 3 Star Destroyers at Kashyyyk without taking damage. Withdraw, Lennox ordered quietly. Report to command that the Rebel Alliance is responding to interference with overwhelming force. This is above our tactical pay grade. The 2 Imperial cruisers retreated, and the refugee convoy continued to safety. But everyone involved knew this was just the opening move, the Empire testing boundaries, determining how committed the resistance was to protecting civilians. The answer was, completely. Day 4 brought new complications. The sheer scale of the operation was beginning to strain resources, fuel supplies running low, transport crews working past exhaustion, safe haven worlds reaching capacity for refugee settlement. The Underground Railroad was performing miracles, but even miracles had limits. We need to accelerate the timeline, Mon Mothma said during the daily strategic briefing, her holographic form showing strain. At current rates, we won't evacuate everyone before the Empire's deadline. And we're receiving reports that Imperial forces are moving from neighboring systems toward Caamas. They're preparing to spring their trap. Then we spring ours first, Dylan said. Rami, implement Protocol Cascade. It's time to show the Empire exactly what a Commonwealth warship can do when it stops holding back. Andromeda's avatar smiled, an expression that carried anticipation rather than warmth. Finally. I've been waiting 3 months to stop fighting with one hand tied behind my back. What's Protocol Cascade? Obi-Wan asked. Something I've been saving for when we absolutely needed it, Dylan replied. The Andromeda has been operating at about 40% of true combat capacity. Enough to defeat Imperial forces without revealing our full capabilities. Protocol Cascade removes those limitations. Every system, full power. Every weapon, maximum output. No holding back, no preserving advantages for future engagements. You're going to show them what this ship can really do, Anakin said, understanding the strategic shift. I'm going to show them why the system's Commonwealth conquered 3 galaxies, Dylan corrected. And why the Empire should have negotiated instead of threatening. Day 5, and Operation Sanctuary entered its final phase. The last million Caamasi boarded transports, the cities below standing empty but intact, monuments to a civilization choosing survival over martyrdom, wisdom over pride. And in neighboring systems, 6 Imperial Star Destroyers began their approach to Caamas. The trap was springing. And the Rebel Alliance was ready. Day 6. The Imperial fleet reverted from hyperspace at the edge of the Caamas system with the precision of a military force that had spent weeks planning this moment. Not 6 Star Destroyers. 18. Dylan watched the tactical display populate with enemy signatures and felt cold calculation settle over him. Palpatine hadn't just prepared a trap, he'd committed enough firepower to crush any conventional resistance fleet 3 times over. 3 full battle groups, coordinated to arrive simultaneously, positioned to prevent any escape. Well, Bika said from the helm, her voice carrying dark humor, at least they're taking us seriously. 18 Star Destroyers, Tyr observed, his Nietzschean tactical instincts analyzing threat vectors. Plus support vessels, I'm counting 43 total capital ships. Dylan, even the Andromeda has limits. We can't fight that fleet and protect the evacuation simultaneously. We're not going to fight them, Dylan said quietly. We're going to show them why bringing a fleet this size was a mistake. On the bridge of the lead Star Destroyer Executor, a vessel that would one day be superseded by a super Star Destroyer of the same name, Grand Moff Tarkin stood with hands clasped behind his back, watching his fleet deploy into perfect formation. This was the culmination of weeks of planning, the Emperor's strategy made manifest. Status of the rebel fleet. Tarkin asked his tactical officer. Scattered across the system, sir. Multiple civilian transports in various states of departure. The Andromeda Ascendant is holding position between our fleet and the last concentration of evacuation ships. They're not moving, sir. Tarkin allowed himself a slight smile. They're protecting the transports. Exactly as predicted. Open a channel to that vessel. Let's offer Captain Hunt one chance to surrender before we demonstrate the futility of opposing the Empire. Dylan's face appeared on the Executor's main view screen, and Tarkin noted the captain's expression, calm, focused, carrying none of the fear that should accompany facing overwhelming odds. Grand Moff Tarkin, Dylan said, his voice carrying across the communication channel. I've read your file. Military strategist, architect of the doctrine of fear, one of Palpatine's most trusted advisors. You're here to spring the trap. Destroy the evacuation fleet, capture or kill resistance leadership, and broadcast the failure across the galaxy as proof that opposing the Empire is futile. You understand the situation clearly, Captain Hunt, Tarkin replied. Surrender now, and I'll allow the civilian transports to depart unharmed. Continue this resistance, and every ship in your evacuation fleet becomes a legitimate military target. The choice is yours, but I assure you. My fleet will destroy yours if you force this confrontation. Grand Moff, I appreciate the offer, Dylan said, and something in his tone made Tarkin's instincts flare with warning. But I'm going to make you a counter-offer. You have 2 minutes to begin hyperspace withdrawal. If your fleet is still in this system in 2 minutes and 1 second, I'm going to demonstrate why the system's Commonwealth didn't build warships, we built apex predators that entire civilizations learned not to provoke. Tarkin felt something cold settle in his chest. The captain spoke with absolute certainty, not bravado or desperation. This was the voice of someone who'd already calculated the tactical scenario and knew exactly how it would end. You're outnumbered 18-1, Tarkin said carefully. Even your advanced technology has limits, Captain. No single vessel can engage this many capital ships and survive. Grand Moff Tarkin, Dylan replied, his expression hardening, you're about to learn the difference between a warship and a weapon of war. Rami, implement Protocol Cascade. Remove all combat limiters. Authorization Hunt Alpha 77. Aboard the Andromeda Ascendant, systems that had been operating at 40% capacity suddenly surged to full power. The ship's reactor, a zero-point energy converter that drew power from the fabric of spacetime itself, began generating output that made the combined power of Tarkin's entire fleet look like children's toys. Every weapon system came online. Every defensive field maximized. Every tactical system engaged with processing power that could have coordinated an entire Commonwealth battle fleet. Andromeda's avatar turned to Dylan, her holographic form seeming to burn with barely contained energy. All systems at maximum capacity, Captain. I've been waiting 3 months to fight without restrictions. Permission to demonstrate why the Magog world ship, a construct the size of a solar system, learned to avoid Commonwealth space. Permission granted, Dylan said. Show them what happens when they threaten 2 billion innocents under our protection. The Andromeda Ascendant moved. Not with the deliberate maneuvering of a capital ship, but with acceleration that defied everything Star Wars physics understood about mass and inertia. The Commonwealth warship closed the distance to Tarkin's fleet in seconds, moving at velocities that made their targeting computers scream errors. And then the real weapons came out. Forward missile tubes 1 through 40, firing pattern Omega, Dylan commanded. Let's thin their formation before we close to knife fighting range. 400 AP rounds launched in a perfectly coordinated salvo, 10 times the firepower the Andromeda had used at Kashyyyk. Each missile carried enough kinetic energy to punch through a Star Destroyer's shields and hull like they were tissue paper. Each was guided by AI sophisticated enough to adjust targeting in microseconds, to predict evasive maneuvers before they were made, to find vulnerabilities in defenses that hadn't even been raised yet. The Imperial fleet's forward line, 6 Star Destroyers that had been advancing in attack formation, simply ceased to exist as a combat-effective force. Not destroyed. Dylan had specifically ordered to disable rather than kill. But in 30 seconds, 6 of the galaxy's most powerful warships were reduced to drifting hulks, their bridges demolished, their weapons disabled, their crews shocked into unconsciousness by atmospheric decompression carefully calculated to stun rather than kill. What just, Tarkin started, staring at tactical displays that couldn't process what they'd witnessed. 6 Star Destroyers, disabled in the time it took to draw breath. Impossible. Nothing in Imperial doctrine, nothing in any military database, prepared them for this level of precision and overwhelming force. Point defense lasers, engage remaining targets, Andromeda said, her voice carrying what sounded like satisfaction. Let's demonstrate why approaching a Commonwealth warship within visual range is tactically inadvisable. The Andromeda's hull bristled with point defense weapons, systems designed to intercept incoming missiles and fighters, but vastly more powerful than their Star Wars equivalents. Beam weapons that didn't require charge time, didn't overheat, simply fired with continuous precision at targets that included Star Destroyer weapons batteries. Turbolaser emplacements across the Imperial fleet simply exploded, disabled by surgical strikes that left the ships intact but completely disarmed. It was like watching a master swordsman disarm opponents without killing them, clinical, efficient, devastating. In 90 seconds, the Imperial fleet had been reduced from overwhelming superiority to helpless targets. Tarkin stared at his tactical displays, watching his carefully planned operation collapse into disaster. 3 years of military experience, decades of strategic planning, all of it meaningless against technology so advanced it might as well be magic. All ships, emergency hyperspace withdrawal, Tarkin commanded, his voice tight with controlled panic. Transmit everything to Imperial Command. They need to see this. They need to understand what we're facing. Grand Moff, 6 ships can't jump, their hyperdrives are disabled, the tactical officer reported. Then they're abandoned, Tarkin said, the decision cold but necessary. We're not staying here to be target practice for that thing. 12 Star Destroyers vanished into hyperspace, fleeing with speed that abandoned all military protocol. Behind them, 6 crippled vessels drifted in space, monuments to the Empire's first encounter with a Commonwealth warship fighting without limitations. Dylan watched them go, feeling no satisfaction, only grim necessity. Rami, casualty report. Minimal, Captain. Approximately 300 Imperial crew casualties across all 6 disabled vessels. Mostly from atmospheric decompression that their life support systems couldn't compensate for quickly enough. I estimate 90% will survive with medical attention. The ships themselves are reparable, though it will take Imperial shipyards months to restore them to combat effectiveness. And our fleet? The evacuation convoy completed departure during the engagement. All 2 billion Caamasi refugees are now en route to safe haven worlds across the Outer Rim. Operation Sanctuary is complete. The bridge fell silent. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, facing overwhelming force, they'd evacuated an entire civilization and sent the Imperial fleet running. Captain, incoming transmission, Harper's voice cut through. It's from Caamas. Elder Ilenikit KLA wants to speak with you. The Caamasi elder's face appeared on the view screen, his ancient features showing tears that, for his peaceful species, represented profound emotional significance. Captain Hunt, I have lived 800 years. I have witnessed the rise and fall of governments, the birth of the Republic and its transformation into empire. In all that time, I have never seen courage like what your Rebel Alliance demonstrated today. We just did what needed to be done, Elder, Dylan said quietly. No, Ilenik corrected gently. You did what everyone told you was impossible. You saved 2 billion lives when strategic necessity said you should sacrifice us for tactical advantage. You demonstrated that principles matter more than victory, that hope is stronger than fear, that tyranny, no matter how powerful, can be opposed. Today, my people lost their homeworld. But we gained something more valuable, proof that goodness exists in this galaxy, that resistance is possible, that the Empire is not invincible. The Caamasi will remember what you did for us, Captain Hunt. And we will make sure the galaxy remembers as well. Dylan felt the weight of those words. This wasn't just about evacuating one civilization. It was about creating a symbol, proof that the impossible could be achieved, that the Empire could be defied, that hope was more than just empty words. May the Force be with you, Captain Hunt. And may your Rebel Alliance inspire others to remember that darkness can be opposed by those brave enough to stand in the light. On Coruscant, in the throne room that had become the center of Imperial power, Emperor Palpatine watched the recordings transmitted by Tarkin's fleet before their humiliating retreat. He watched the Andromeda Ascendant move with speeds that violated known physics. Watched weapons that disabled 6 Star Destroyers in seconds. Watched precision that suggested intelligence beyond organic capability. Watched a single vessel render an entire Imperial battle group irrelevant. And he smiled. Your Majesty, Tarkin said via holographic transmission, his voice carrying barely controlled fury and shock, I underestimated the Andromeda's capabilities. We all did. That vessel operates on principles we don't understand, with technology centuries beyond anything in Imperial inventory. If they had chosen to destroy my fleet rather than disable it, 18 Star Destroyers would be debris right now. I know, Grand Moff, Palpatine replied calmly. I've known since Kashyyyk that conventional military force wouldn't defeat the Andromeda. That was never the plan. Then what is the plan, Your Majesty? Because that ship just demonstrated it can single-handedly defeat any fleet we send against it. How do we counter that level of power? Palpatine's yellow Sith eyes gleamed with malevolent calculation. You don't counter it, Grand Moff. You make it irrelevant. Captain Hunt thinks he won today. He evacuated 2 billion Caamasi, humiliated an Imperial fleet, demonstrated that the Empire can be opposed. He's given the galaxy exactly what it needed, hope. And that helps us how? Because hope, Grand Moff, is the most dangerous thing you can give desperate people. It makes them take risks. It makes them believe the impossible is possible. It makes them commit to resistance even when strategic necessity says they should surrender. Palpatine rose from his throne, moving to the viewport that showed Coruscant's endless cityscape. Hunt saved Caamas. 2 billion souls, evacuated before we could implement consequences. The galaxy will celebrate this victory. Resistance movements across 100 worlds will be inspired. Systems considering opposition will believe the Rebel Alliance can protect them. But here's what they won't realize until it's too late. Hunt just set a precedent he can't possibly maintain. 2 billion refugees need shelter, food, resources. Safe haven worlds are now targets the Empire knows to watch. The underground railroads routes are exposed. And most critically, Hunt revealed his full capabilities, every tactical advantage he'd been preserving. So now we know exactly what we're facing, Tarkin said, understanding beginning to dawn. Exactly. Hunt fought the battle he needed to fight, saved the innocents, demonstrated hope, inspired resistance. But he gave us something far more valuable. Complete intelligence on his ship's capabilities, confirmation that conventional military force is useless against him, and a strategic playbook that shows us exactly how to defeat the Rebel Alliance. You're going to attack the refugees? Tarkin asked. Hunt will defend them, and we've just seen what happens when we try conventional assault. No, Palpatine said softly. We're going to do something far more insidious. We're going to let the refugees become the Rebel Alliance's greatest vulnerability. 2 billion mouths to feed, bodies to shelter, lives to protect, all of it creating resource drain that will cripple resistance operations. And when other populations see what Caamas cost, the exposure of resistance networks, the revelation of safe haven worlds, the strain on rebel resources, they'll think twice before accepting similar rescue. Hunt won today's battle, but he's already losing the war. Palpatine turned from the viewport, his expression carrying satisfaction that had nothing to do with military victory. Issue new orders, Grand Moff. All Imperial forces are to avoid direct engagement with the Andromeda Ascendant. Instead, we focus on what Hunt can't defend with superior technology, the vast logistics network he's created, the infrastructure supporting 2 billion refugees, the safe haven worlds that can't hide forever. We make resistance so resource-intensive, so operationally complex, so constantly under pressure that even Hunt's advanced technology can't overcome basic strategic mathematics. One ship cannot defend a galaxy, no matter how powerful. And when populations realize that resistance brings more suffering than submission, the Rebel Alliance will collapse not from military defeat but from strategic exhaustion. Tarkin nodded slowly, his tactical mind appreciating the elegance of the strategy. Turn their victory into their greatest weakness. Make hope itself the weapon that destroys them. Precisely, Grand Moff. Captain Hunt is brilliant, resourceful, and commands technology we cannot match. But he's also playing a game where the rules favor patience, attrition, and the reality that even miracles have limits. We have time. We have resources. And most importantly, we have the Empire's entire apparatus working to ensure that every victory the rebels achieve costs them more than they can afford. Begin implementation immediately. I want intelligence operations targeting refugee settlements, economic pressure on safe haven worlds, propaganda showing the cost of rebel protection. And Grand Moff. Make sure the galaxy understands that while Captain Hunt saved Caamas today, he's created a situation where millions more will eventually suffer because of the precedent he set. It will be done, Your Majesty. As Tarkin's hologram faded, Palpatine returned to his throne, contemplating the long game that the Rebel Alliance didn't yet realize they were losing. Hunt had saved 2 billion lives today. In doing so, he'd created a situation that would eventually force impossible choices, defend the refugees and abandon other populations, or spread resources so thin that nothing could be effectively protected. Either way, the Rebel Alliance would learn what the Jedi had learned, that power without sustainability was just a different form of defeat. The dark side didn't win through strength. It won through patience, through turning victories into weaknesses, through making hope itself the trap. And Captain Hunt had just walked into that trap with both eyes open, believing he'd won. Aboard the Andromeda Ascendant, Dylan stood in the observation deck watching Caamas recede into the distance. The planet was empty now, its cities silent, its civilization displaced but alive. We did it, Ahsoka said, joining him at the viewport. The young Togruta looked exhausted but triumphant. 2 billion people saved. The Empire humiliated. Hope proven stronger than fear. For now, Dylan said quietly. Ahsoka looked at him sharply, hearing something in his tone that contradicted the celebration echoing through the ship. Captain, we won. The evacuation was successful, the Imperial fleet retreated, and we demonstrated that resistance is possible. Why don't you seem happy? Dylan was silent for a long moment, his tactical mind already working through the implications of what they'd accomplished. Because Palpatine didn't send 18 Star Destroyers expecting to win, Ahsoka. He sent them knowing we'd defeat them. This entire operation was designed to force us into exactly this position, responsible for 2 billion refugees, our capabilities fully revealed, our resources stretched beyond sustainability. You think this was a trap we just sprung on ourselves? I think, Dylan said slowly, that we did the right thing for the wrong strategic reasons. We saved Caamas because it was morally correct, because those lives mattered more than tactical advantage. But in doing so, we've created a situation where the Empire doesn't need to defeat us militarily, they just need to wait for the weight of our own success to crush us. So what do we do? Dylan turned from the viewport, his expression hardening with the resolve that had carried him through 3 centuries of impossible odds. We adapt. We've proven hope is possible. Now we prove it's sustainable. The Empire thinks they've set a trap. We're about to show them that the Rebel Alliance doesn't collapse under pressure, it grows stronger. But first, we need to consolidate. Establish permanent infrastructure for the refugees. Transform scattered resistance cells into a coordinated network. And most importantly, we need to show the galaxy that saving Caamas wasn't a one-time miracle. It's the model for how resistance operates from now on. The Empire wanted us exposed and vulnerable. Instead, we're going to use that visibility to inspire 100 worlds to stand up and say, we're not afraid anymore. The Andromeda Ascendant proved the Empire can be defeated. Now the Rebel Alliance is going to prove that tyranny, no matter how patient or powerful, will eventually fall. Ahsoka felt hope surge through her, the same hope that had sustained her through Order 66 and 3 months of desperate survival. Then the war's just beginning. The war's been ongoing for 3 months, Dylan corrected. But today, we stopped hiding. Today, we declared that the Rebel Alliance isn't just surviving, we're fighting. And we're going to win. Behind them, through the viewport, Caamas faded into starlight. An empty world. A displaced civilization. 2 billion refugees seeking new homes. And proof that hope, no matter how impossible, could change the galaxy. 3 weeks after the Caamas evacuation, the Rebel Alliance discovered that victory could be more complex than defeat. The Andromeda Ascendant held position at the edge of the Lantilles system, one of 17 safe haven locations now sheltering Caamasi refugees. Dylan stood in the war room, staring at reports that painted a picture of success transforming into crisis. Resource consumption is exceeding projections by 40%, Mon Mothma said via holographic transmission, her voice carrying the strain of someone managing an impossible logistical nightmare. 2 billion refugees require food, shelter, medical care, education, infrastructure that safe haven worlds are struggling to provide even with Alderaan's financial support. And the Empire is exploiting that struggle, Bail Organa added, his holographic form showing frustration. They're not attacking the refugee settlements directly, they're pressuring the worlds sheltering them. Economic sanctions, trade restrictions, veiled threats about harboring fugitives. 3 systems have already requested we relocate refugees elsewhere because imperial pressure is becoming untenable. So we're not just protecting refugees, Bika said from her station. We're protecting the worlds protecting the refugees. Which spreads us even thinner than before. Dylan studied the tactical displays, watching the Empire's strategy unfold with methodical precision. Palpatine wasn't attacking the Rebel Alliance's strength, he was attacking their commitments, their moral obligations, the very principles that made them different from the Empire. It's elegant, Tyr observed with grudging respect. The Empire can't defeat the Andromeda militarily, so they're making our victory at Caamas into a strategic liability. Every refugee we saved is a resource drain we can't sustain. Every safe haven world becomes a target we must defend. Every day that passes, the gap between our capabilities and our obligations grows wider. We're not abandoning the Caamasi, Anakin said sharply. We saved them. We're responsible for them now. No one's suggesting abandonment, Obi-Wan interjected calmly. But Tyr's right that we're facing strategic mathematics that don't favor us. We have finite resources trying to address infinite needs. Something has to change, or the weight of our commitments will collapse the resistance before the Empire fires another shot. Then we find additional resources, Dylan said, his command certainty cutting through the despair. The Caamas evacuation demonstrated what the Rebel Alliance can accomplish. That visibility is an asset, not just a liability. The galaxy watched us save 2 billion people and humiliate an Imperial fleet. How many systems are watching and thinking, maybe resistance is possible? According to our intelligence networks, Harper reported via comm, approximately 40 systems have initiated contact requesting alliance support. 12 have offered resources, ships, supplies, volunteers, in exchange for protection from Imperial reprisal. 8 are considering formal alliance. That's more interest than we've received in 3 months combined, Mon Mothma said, hope flickering in her voice. The Caamas operation changed perception. We're no longer just rebel fugitives. We're a credible alternative to Imperial rule. Which creates its own problems, Dylan countered. Every system that joins us becomes a target. Every resource they contribute makes them vulnerable to Imperial retaliation. We're not just building a resistance, we're building a government in exile that needs to function as an actual government. Then we build that government, Senator Organa said firmly. Mon Mothma and I have been working on formal alliance structure. Political framework, military command hierarchy, resource allocation systems. The Rebel Alliance can't remain a scattered network of cells anymore. If we're going to be visible, we need to be organized. A formal declaration? Obi-Wan asked. We announced the Rebel Alliance as a governmental body opposing the Empire. We already did that when we saved Caamas, Mon Mothma replied. The Empire certainly treated it as an act of war. We might as well embrace what we've become and build structure around it. Captain Hunt, would the Andromeda serve as the Alliance's flagship? The visible symbol of resistance backed by actual military capability? Dylan felt the weight of that question. Accepting would mean transforming from independent operator to Alliance military commander, committed to defending not just principles but actual governmental structure. It meant permanent integration into this galaxy's politics, accepting that the Andromeda might never return to Commonwealth space. On one condition, Dylan said finally. The Alliance maintains the principles we demonstrated at Caamas. We don't sacrifice civilians for strategic advantage. We don't abandon populations because defending them is expensive. We fight the Empire without becoming what we oppose. Those principles may cost us military victories, Bale warned. The Empire has no such restrictions. Then we win differently, Dylan replied. The Commonwealth fell because we compromised our principles for tactical expediency. The Rebel Alliance succeeds by proving that principles and victory aren't mutually exclusive. We're not fighting to replace the Empire with another authoritarian regime, we're fighting to prove democracy and freedom can survive against tyranny. Idealistic, Tyr observed dryly. Also strategically naive. But I suppose that's why people follow you, Dylan. You actually believe the nonsense you're selling. Not nonsense, Master Yoda interjected, his holographic form small but carrying weight. Truth. Dark and difficult, the path ahead is. Tempting, it will be, to compromise, to accept necessary evils, to justify today's sins with tomorrow's hoped for virtue. But down that path, the dark side lies. The Empire we become, if principles we abandon. Then we maintain those principles, Anakin said, his mechanical hand clenching. Whatever it costs. The old Jedi Order fell because we became too attached to the Republic, too willing to compromise our values for political necessity. This time, we do it right. While the Rebel Alliance leadership debated structure and principles, on Coruscant the Empire implemented Phase 2 of its strategy against the Resistance. In the Imperial Security Bureau's Operations Center, analysts worked around the clock processing intelligence on refugee settlements, Alliance supply routes, and safe haven worlds. But they weren't planning military strikes. They were planning something far more insidious. Operation Refuge, the ISB director explained to Grand Moff Tarkin via secure holographic transmission. We've identified 47 civilian populations across the Outer Rim that are considering requesting Rebel Alliance protection. Our objective is to ensure those requests never become reality. How? Tarkin asked. Propaganda and economic pressure. We're broadcasting Holonet reports showing the true cost of Caamas evacuation. Refugee camps struggling with overcrowding, safe haven worlds facing Imperial sanctions, the Rebel Alliance stretched beyond capacity. We're making resistance look not heroic but irresponsible. The director activated holographic displays showing media campaigns being deployed across Imperial space. News reports featured interviews with refugees expressing gratitude mixed with hardship, economic analyses showing how safe haven worlds were struggling under the burden, and carefully edited footage suggesting the Rebel Alliance had saved Caamas only to create suffering elsewhere. We're not lying, the director continued. The refugee situation genuinely is difficult. We're simply emphasizing that difficulty, making sure every potential resistance sympathizer understands that Alliance protection comes with costs that may exceed Imperial occupation. Psychological warfare, Tarkin observed. Turn the Alliance's greatest victory into a cautionary tale. Precisely. And it's working. 8 systems that had initiated contact with the Alliance have withdrawn their inquiries. 12 more are reconsidering. Populations are beginning to ask, is resistance worth the suffering it brings? And when they decide it isn't, then the Rebel Alliance's expansion stalls, the director said with satisfaction. They'll be locked into defending what they already have, 2 billion Caamasi refugees, 17 safe haven worlds, scattered resistance cells. Unable to grow because potential allies are too frightened by the example we're setting with Caamas's aftermath. Tarkin nodded slowly. Continue Operation Refuge. And begin Phase 3, selective targeting of Alliance supply routes. Not enough to trigger major military response, but enough to make their logistics increasingly difficult. Every shipment delayed, every resource convoy intercepted, makes their situation slightly more unsustainable. Death by 1,000 cuts rather than direct confrontation. Exactly. Captain Hunt's ship may be invincible in battle, but logistics networks are vulnerable to disruption. And eventually, even advanced technology can't overcome the simple mathematics of insufficient resources trying to meet infinite needs. Aboard the Andromeda, Harper burst into the war room with an expression that mixed outrage and grudging respect. Boss, you need to see this. The Empire just launched a propaganda campaign that's, actually pretty brilliant. He activated holographic displays showing Imperial media coverage of the Caamas situation. The reports were technically accurate, refugee camps were overcrowded, safe haven worlds were struggling, resources were stretched thin. But the presentation suggested that the Rebel Alliance's reckless rescue had created more suffering than it prevented. They're using our victory against us, Ahsoka said, watching an interview with a Caamasi refugee who expressed gratitude but also described harsh conditions in temporary settlements. Making it look like we saved them from immediate destruction only to consign them to slow suffering. It's effective, Mon Mothma admitted. We're receiving reports that systems considering Alliance membership are reconsidering. The Empire isn't threatening them with military force. They're simply asking if resistance is worth the cost Caamas demonstrates. And populations are concluding it isn't, Bail Organa said heavily. 3 more systems withdrew inquiries today. Captain Hunt, we're facing a strategic situation where our most visible success is becoming our greatest recruitment obstacle. Dylan studied the propaganda with the analytical focus of someone who'd fought information wars before. The Empire's campaign was sophisticated. It didn't deny the Alliance's capability or disparage their intentions. It simply emphasized consequences, made suffering visible, and let potential allies draw their own conclusions. We need to change the narrative, Dylan said finally. The Empire is controlling the story about Caamas. We need to tell our own version. One that's equally honest about difficulties but frames them differently. How? Mon Mothma asked. The Empire controls the Holonet. Our communication networks reach resistance cells but not general populations. Then we use the Andromeda differently, Dylan replied. Rami, could we broadcast directly to civilian populations? Override Imperial holonet control and transmit our message across multiple systems simultaneously. Andromeda's avatar appeared, processing the request. Technically possible. I could hijack Imperial communication satellites, inject our transmission into their broadcast networks, and maintain it for approximately 47 minutes before they implement countermeasures. But Captain, this would reveal additional capabilities, our ability to compromise Imperial infrastructure at will. Worth it, Dylan decided. If we're fighting an information war, we need to actually communicate. Harper, start compiling footage from refugee settlements. Not propaganda, just reality. Show the difficulties but also show people rebuilding lives, communities forming, hope persisting despite hardship. We're going to broadcast truth, Obi-Wan said, understanding. Not propaganda that claims everything is perfect, but honest acknowledgement that resistance is difficult while demonstrating it's still worthwhile. Exactly. The Empire's strategy assumes populations will choose easy submission over difficult resistance. We need to show them that difficulty doesn't equal impossibility, that suffering with purpose is different than suffering under tyranny. 2 days later, across 43 Imperial-controlled systems, the holonet broadcasts were interrupted by a transmission that shouldn't have been possible. The screen showed Captain Dylan Hunt standing on the observation deck of the Andromeda Ascendant, Caamas visible through the viewport behind him, a planet abandoned but intact, reminder of what had been saved. Citizens of the galaxy, Dylan began, his voice carrying across light years, my name is Captain Dylan Hunt of the system's Commonwealth warship Andromeda Ascendant. 3 weeks ago, the Rebel Alliance evacuated 2 billion Caamasi refugees from their homeworld rather than allow the Empire to enslave or destroy them. The Empire has been broadcasting the difficulties that followed, and those broadcasts are accurate. Refugee life is hard. Safe haven worlds are struggling. Resources are stretched thin. But here's what the Empire isn't telling you, difficulty isn't the same as failure. Yes, Caamasi refugees face hardship. Yes, worlds sheltering them experience pressure. But those refugees are alive. They're free. They're rebuilding communities based on principles the Empire tried to erase. The broadcast cut to footage from refugee settlements. Not propaganda showing perfect conditions, but honest documentation of families creating new homes, children attending improvised schools, communities supporting each other through shared hardship. The Empire wants you to believe that resistance brings more suffering than submission. They want you paralyzed by fear, convinced that opposing tyranny causes more pain than accepting it. But they're lying through selective truth. Yes, resistance is difficult. Yes, freedom comes with costs. But those costs are choices we make, not punishments inflicted upon us. The Caamasi could have submitted to Imperial demands. They could have informed on resistance sympathizers, hosted garrison forces, abandoned their principles in exchange for security. Instead, they chose exile. They chose hardship. They chose freedom over comfort, principle over submission. Dylan's expression hardened, and behind him, the Andromeda's weapon ports became visible, a reminder of the power backing these words. The Empire tells you they're invincible, that resistance is futile, that the only rational choice is submission. But 3 weeks ago, 18 Imperial Star Destroyers fled from one Commonwealth warship. The Empire retreated, humiliated, unable to prevent 2 billion people from escaping their grasp. I'm not going to tell you that joining the Rebel Alliance is easy. It isn't. I'm not going to promise that resistance comes without cost. It does. But I will promise you this, the Alliance stands for a principle that transcends strategic calculation, that freedom is worth fighting for, that tyranny can be opposed, and that hope is stronger than fear. The Empire offers you security through submission. The Rebel Alliance offers you freedom through struggle. The choice is yours. But understand, choosing the difficult path doesn't make you foolish. It makes you free. The transmission ended, and across 43 systems, populations who'd been consuming Imperial propaganda suddenly had alternative perspective. Not denial of difficulty, but reframing of what difficulty meant. On Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine watched the broadcast with an expression that might have been satisfaction. "He's good," Palpatine mused. Hunt understands propaganda, not as lies, but as selective emphasis. He's turned our narrative of costly resistance into principled struggle. Effective. "Should we counter-broadcast, Your Majesty?" the ISB director asked. "No," Palpatine said thoughtfully. "Let his message spread. Let populations see his honest acknowledgement of difficulty. Because here's what Hunt doesn't realize, acknowledging that resistance is hard just makes our strategy more effective. Every population that joins the alliance because of his inspiring words becomes another resource drain, another commitment the Rebel Alliance must maintain, another obligation that spreads them thinner. Hunt thinks he's winning an information war. He's actually recruiting for his own exhaustion. Every system his broadcast inspires to join the alliance accelerates the timeline until the weight of his commitments becomes unsustainable." Palpatine smiled, yellow Sith eyes gleaming. "Let him have his propaganda victory. Let him inspire resistance across 100 worlds. Because every success makes the eventual collapse more devastating. And when that collapse comes, when the Rebel Alliance buckles under obligations it cannot meet, the galaxy will learn the most valuable lesson, that hope itself was the cruelest deception of all." Aboard the Andromeda, Harper monitored response to the broadcast with growing excitement. "Boss, it's working. We're getting communication requests from 23 systems that had gone silent. 15 new inquiries from worlds considering alliance membership. And the Underground Railroad is reporting volunteer applications from civilian captains who want to help transport refugees. Public opinion shift?" Mon Mothma asked. "Significant," Harper confirmed. Imperial Holonet polls, which they probably wish they hadn't published, show that 38% of surveyed populations now view the Rebel Alliance as legitimate resistance rather than terrorist organization. That's up from 11% before Caamas. "We're winning the information war," Bail Organa said with cautious optimism. Hunt's broadcast reframed the narrative. Populations are starting to see resistance as principled choice rather than reckless rebellion. "Don't celebrate yet," Tyr warned. "Winning hearts and minds is meaningless if we can't sustain the infrastructure those hearts and minds require. We're still facing the same logistical mathematics, finite resources, infinite commitments, and an empire with patience to wait for our collapse." "Then we don't collapse," Dylan said firmly. "We've proven twice now that the impossible can be achieved, first at Caamas, now in the information campaign. The Empire expects strategic exhaustion to defeat us. We're going to prove that principle-driven resistance is more sustainable than fear-driven oppression." "How?" Anakin asked. "We're already stretched thin. Every new system that joins creates additional obligations we barely have resources to meet." "Then we changed the model," Dylan replied. "We've been operating as saviors, the Rebel Alliance that rescues populations and then becomes responsible for them. Instead, we need to operate as coordinators, connecting systems that need help with systems that can provide it, building networks rather than hierarchies, creating self-sustaining resistance infrastructure." "Decentralization," Obi-Wan said, understanding. "The old Jedi Order failed because we were centralized, one temple, one council, easily targeted by a single enemy. Master Yoda suggested we operate as a network instead. Apply that same principle to the entire alliance." "Exactly," Dylan agreed. "The Empire wins through centralized control, one emperor, one government, one military hierarchy. We win by being too distributed to destroy, too interconnected to isolate, too adaptable to outmaneuver." Master Yoda's holographic form appeared, his ancient eyes reflecting approval. "Learned, you have, Captain Hunt. The lesson the Commonwealth's fall taught. That rigid structures, vulnerable they are. That adaptation, strength it is. That networks, more resilient than hierarchies they prove. Then we build that network, Mon Mothma said decisively. A rebel alliance that isn't an alternative empire but an alternative to empire, distributed, principled, sustainable. It won't be easy, Dylan warned. Coordination without centralization is complex. Networks require trust, communication, shared principles without shared command. We're essentially inventing a new form of resistance. Good, Anakin said, his mechanical hand clenching with determination. The old forms failed. The Republic fell, the Jedi were destroyed, and the Empire rose. Time for something new. Time for something better, Ahsoka added. A resistance that doesn't just fight tyranny but demonstrates what comes after tyranny falls. Dylan looked around the war room, physical and holographic forms representing the Rebel Alliance's leadership. 3 weeks ago, they'd been scattered survivors fighting for daily survival. Now they were building something that might actually challenge an empire. It wouldn't be easy. The Empire had patience, resources, and strategies specifically designed to make resistance unsustainable. But the Alliance had something the Empire couldn't match, people who believed that freedom was worth any cost, principles that transcended strategic calculation, and hope that refused to die no matter how impossible the odds. Then let's get to work, Dylan said. We have a network to build and an empire to prove wrong. 6 months after the Caamas evacuation, the Rebel Alliance had transformed from a scattered network of cells into something the galaxy had never seen before, a distributed resistance movement that functioned like a living organism rather than a military hierarchy. The Andromeda Ascendant dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Bastine system, where a crisis was unfolding that would test everything the Alliance had built. Situation report, Dylan commanded, watching tactical displays populate with data that Andromeda's sensors gathered faster than any Imperial system could process. The Empire is implementing forced labor conscription on Bastine 4, Andromeda reported, her avatar's expression showing what might have been anger if AI could truly feel such emotions. Population of 8 million, primarily agricultural communities. Imperial decree requires 20% of the population, 1.6 million people, to be transported to labor camps for essential infrastructure projects. The local resistance cell is requesting immediate Alliance intervention. We can't evacuate 1.6 million people, Bika said from the helm, her voice carrying hard realism. Not in the time frame before Imperial transports arrive. Even with the entire Underground Railroad mobilized, we'd need weeks. Then we don't evacuate them, Dylan said, his tactical mind already working through alternatives. We prevent the conscription. Rami, where are the Imperial transport ships? Currently in orbit, waiting for ground forces to process and load the conscripted laborers. 6 heavy transports, 2 Arquitens-class cruiser escorts. Standard Imperial labor conscription operation. Which means they're expecting compliance, not resistance, Tyr observed. Dylan, if we destroy those transports, we're escalating. The Empire will retaliate, and Bastine doesn't have the infrastructure to defend itself long-term. We're not destroying them, Dylan said. We're disabling them, permanently enough that the Empire has to withdraw and reorganize, temporarily enough that we're not committing to defend Bastine indefinitely. And while their attention is on us, we give Bastine's population something the Empire never expected, a choice. On Bastine IV's surface, in the agricultural settlement of Mather, Governor Talos received an unexpected communication from the Rebel Alliance that circumvented all Imperial monitoring. Governor, this is Captain Dylan Hunt. In 30 minutes, Imperial transport capacity in orbit will be unavailable. The forced labor conscription will be postponed, probably for several weeks while the Empire reorganizes. That gives your population time to make a decision. Talos felt his heart hammering. He'd been quietly sympathetic to resistance causes, but sympathizing and actively opposing the Empire were vastly different. What kind of decision? Whether to remain under Imperial control or join the Rebel Alliance. I'm not going to tell you that Alliance membership is easy or that we can protect you from all Imperial response. But I can tell you that we've developed a model for distributed resistance that's working across 43 systems. Communities that maintain autonomy, coordinate with alliance networks, and support each other against Imperial pressure. You're offering us membership in a rebellion, Talos said carefully. Which means the Empire will retaliate. Bestine doesn't have military forces. We're farmers, Governor. How do we resist an empire? The same way farmers have always resisted tyranny, Dylan replied. By refusing to cooperate. By building networks the empire can't easily dismantle. By remembering that the empire needs your agricultural production more than you need their protection. Governor, you have 30 minutes before Imperial forces realize their transports are disabled. Use that time to decide whether compliance or resistance better serves your population. The transmission ended, and Talos stood in his office, facing the most consequential decision of his life. In orbit above Bestine, the Andromeda's point defense lasers spoke with surgical precision. Not at the Imperial personnel. Not at the transport ship's life support or crew quarters. But at the delicate hyperdrive motivators, at the sublight engine control systems, at every component that made interstellar travel possible. In 90 seconds, 6 Imperial transports were converted from functional starships into expensive orbital debris, intact, with crews unharmed, but completely incapable of leaving the system under their own power. The Arquitens-class cruiser escorts opened fire immediately, turbolasers tracking the Andromeda with targeting computers that were 3 generations behind Commonwealth standard. Their weapons aren't even penetrating our shields, Andromeda reported with what sounded like disappointment. Captain, permission to demonstrate why attacking a Commonwealth warship is tactically inadvisable. Permission granted, but disable only. We're making a point, not starting a massacre. The Andromeda's return fire was clinical, AP rounds that punched through the cruiser's weapons batteries, disabling offensive capability while leaving the ships otherwise intact. In under 2 minutes, both Imperial escorts were drifting helplessly, unable to fight, unable to flee, able only to transmit panic distress signals to Imperial command. Dylan opened a channel to the disabled Imperial forces. Imperial vessels, your transport operation is concluded. Your ships will require extensive repairs before they can leave Bestine orbit. I recommend you use that time to reconsider whether forced labor conscription is worth the cost of Imperial resources. Captain Hunt out. On Bestine 4, Governor Talos had spent his 30 minutes consulting with community leaders, agricultural cooperative representatives, and the quiet resistance cell that had been operating in shadows for months. The vote wasn't even close. This is Governor Talos to all Imperial forces on Bestine. As of this moment, Bestine 4 is declaring independence from Imperial control and requesting membership in the Rebel Alliance. We're not warriors. We're not soldiers. But we're also not slaves. The Empire demanded 20% of our population for labor camps. The Rebel Alliance asks nothing except that we govern ourselves and support each other. The choice is obvious. All Imperial personnel are ordered to evacuate the planet within 48 hours. Any who wish to remain as civilians under Bestine authority may do so. But as Imperial representatives, your time here is finished. The declaration rippled across the holonet. Not through Imperial channels, which the Empire would have censored, but through alliance networks that Harper had spent 6 months building. Within hours, populations across the Outer Rim knew that Bestine had defied the Empire and survived. That's the 14th system to join the Alliance this month, Mon Mothma said via holographic transmission, her voice carrying satisfaction mixed with concern. Captain Hunt's intervention model is working. But we're approaching a threshold where the Empire will have to respond with overwhelming force rather than isolated operations. Let them, Bail Organa replied. 43 allied systems now, each supporting each other through distributed networks. The Empire can't occupy all of us simultaneously, and every system they attack proves our message, that submission brings exploitation while resistance brings solidarity. We're still vulnerable to coordinated Imperial assault, Tyr warned, his Nietzschean tactical instincts never letting optimism override reality check. Dylan, the Empire has been patient, letting us spread resources thin across multiple commitments. But patience has limits. Eventually, Palpatine demonstrates that distributed resistance still can't match centralized military might. Then we make sure that when he demonstrates, we're ready, Dylan said. Rami, what's our current alliance defense posture? Andromeda's avatar displayed a galactic map showing the 43 allied systems connected by communication networks, supply routes, and mutual defense agreements. It looked less like a military hierarchy and more like a neural network, distributed, interconnected, adaptable. Each allied system maintains local defense forces coordinated through alliance tactical networks, Andromeda reported. We have rapid response protocols that allow multiple systems to support each other within hours. The Andromeda serves as mobile heavy support, with hyperspace routes calculated to reach any allied world within 6 hours maximum. It's working, Obi-Wan observed. The Empire attacks one system, 3 others send support before Imperial forces can consolidate. They pressure one world economically, 2 others increase trade to compensate. We're operating as a true alliance, not a hierarchy where one leader makes all decisions, but a network where each member contributes and benefits. The Jedi should learn from this, Master Yoda said, his holographic form small but carrying weight. For too long, one temple, one council we maintained. Centralized, we were. Easy to destroy, we proved. But now, 27 Jedi survivors we have, scattered across allied worlds. Each teaching, each protecting, each interpreting the Force according to their understanding. A network, not an order. Resilient, not rigid. And it's inspiring other networks, Ahsoka added. We're receiving reports of civilian resistance movements across Imperial space. They're not asking the Alliance for direct support, they're adopting our model. Distributed cells, mutual aid, refusing cooperation with Imperial demands. The Empire wanted to make an example of Caamas, Anakin said, his mechanical hand clenching with satisfaction. Instead, we made an example of resistance. Now populations across the galaxy are learning that tyranny can be opposed. On Coruscant, Grand Moff Tarkin presented Emperor Palpatine with strategic assessments that should have been alarming but somehow seemed to amuse the Sith Lord. 43 systems have now formally joined the Rebel Alliance, Tarkin reported. Hundreds more are implementing distributed resistance tactics without formal alliance membership. Our labor conscription operations are being disrupted. Our economic controls are being circumvented. And Captain Hunt's ship continues to operate with impunity, demonstrating that conventional military force cannot challenge it. And yet you don't seem concerned, Your Majesty, Tarkin observed carefully. Palpatine smiled, not the grandfatherly expression he'd once used as Chancellor, but the cold satisfaction of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. Because, Grand Moff, the Rebel Alliance is doing exactly what I expected. They're growing. They're succeeding. They're proving that resistance is possible. With respect, Your Majesty, how does the rebels' success serve Imperial interests? Because success breeds confidence, and confidence breeds overextension, Palpatine replied. Hunt has built a distributed network spanning 43 systems. He's demonstrated that the Andromeda can protect allied worlds from isolated Imperial operations. He's created infrastructure that appears sustainable and resilient. But here's what he doesn't realize, networks have nodes, and nodes can be targeted. Distributed systems require coordination, and coordination requires communication. Resilience depends on mutual support, which means every system in the Alliance is invested in defending every other system. Palpatine rose from his throne, moving to the strategic display that showed the Rebel Alliance's growing influence. The Alliance thinks their distribution makes them resilient. It actually makes them predictable. Every allied system is connected to multiple others. Every communication pathway is necessary for network coordination. And every successful defense requires multiple systems responding to support each other. "You're going to attack the network infrastructure," Tarkin said, understanding dawning. "Not individual systems, but the connections between them." "Precisely. Hunt built a network that depends on rapid communication and mutual support. We're going to demonstrate what happens when that network is disrupted. Simultaneous attacks on communication relays, targeting hyperspace routes with interdiction fields, isolating allied systems from each other. And when they can't coordinate, when mutual support becomes impossible, when each world stands alone. They fall individually despite being stronger together," Tarkin finished. "Exactly. The Rebel Alliance's greatest strength, their distributed resilience, becomes their greatest weakness. Because Hunt can't be everywhere simultaneously, no matter how powerful his ship is. And when allied worlds are calling for help he can't provide, when populations realize that alliance membership brings isolation rather than solidarity, the entire network collapses from within. When do we implement this operation?" Palpatine's yellow eyes gleamed. "When the alliance is most confident, most extended, most certain that their model is succeeding. When they believe they've countered our patience with their resilience. That's when we demonstrate that patience was never our strategy, it was our weapon." "How long?" "Soon, Grand Moff. Very soon. Let them recruit a few more systems, spread their resources slightly thinner, become fractionally more confident in their invulnerability. And then." Palpatine didn't finish the sentence, but Tarkin understood. The Empire was about to teach the Rebel Alliance the cruelest lesson, that hope, when built on distributed networks rather than centralized strength, could be shattered by simply cutting the threads that bound the network together. Aboard the Andromeda Ascendant, Dylan stood in the observation deck looking out at Bestine 4, the 14th system to join the Alliance in 6 months, proof that the model he'd built was working. But deep in his tactical instincts, something was screaming warnings. "You're thinking about the Commonwealth," Bika said, joining him at the viewport. She'd served with Dylan long enough to recognize when his mind was working through historical parallels. "The Nietzschean uprising succeeded because they understood something we didn't," Dylan said quietly. "That distributed resistance could be defeated by disrupting coordination. They didn't need to conquer our worlds one by one. They just needed to isolate them from each other. Cut communication networks, blockade hyperspace routes, force each system to defend itself independently. And the Commonwealth fell because isolated systems couldn't sustain resistance without mutual support," Bika finished. "You're worried the Empire will do the same to the Alliance." "I'm certain they will," Dylan corrected. "Palpatine's been too patient, too accepting of our expansion. He's waiting for something. For us to reach a threshold where simultaneous disruption creates cascading failure. So what do we do? Build redundancy. More communication networks, alternate hyperspace routes, local resource production to reduce dependency on supply chains. We prepare for the moment when the network gets attacked and make sure individual nodes can function independently until coordination is restored. That's going to require significant resources," Bika warned. "We're already stretched thin managing 43 allied systems." "Then we make it a priority," Dylan said firmly. "Because I've fought this war before, Bika. I've watched a distributed civilization collapse when coordination was disrupted. I'm not making that mistake again." He activated his comm. "This is the captain to all Alliance leadership. Immediate strategic conference. We need to discuss network vulnerabilities and worst-case contingencies. Because the Empire is about to test us in ways we haven't prepared for, and I want us ready before that test arrives." Across the Allied systems, leaders received the summons and felt both reassurance and concern. Reassurance that Captain Hunt's tactical brilliance was anticipating threats before they materialized. Concern that he saw something threatening enough to require immediate attention. The Rebel Alliance had grown from scattered survivors to a galactic network in 6 months. It had proven that resistance was possible, that hope could inspire change, that tyranny could be opposed. Now it would discover whether success had made it strong enough to survive what came next. Or whether the Empire's patience had been the trap all along. The war between the Rebel Alliance and the Galactic Empire had entered a new phase, no longer scattered skirmishes between fugitives and occupiers, but a genuine contest between two fundamentally different visions of galactic governance. The Empire offered security through centralized control, order through fear, and peace through absolute submission. The Rebel Alliance offered freedom through distributed resistance, hope through mutual support, and dignity through principled opposition to tyranny. In the 6 months since the Andromeda Ascendant had arrived in the Star Wars galaxy, everything had changed. A ship from another universe had become the symbol of resistance. A scattered group of survivors had become a coordinated network of 43 allied systems. And a galaxy that had resigned itself to imperial rule had rediscovered something it thought was lost forever: hope. But hope alone wasn't enough. The Empire had patience, resources, and strategies specifically designed to exploit the Alliance's apparent strengths as hidden weaknesses. Palpatine had watched the Resistance grow, had allowed their success, had waited for the perfect moment to demonstrate that distributed networks could be shattered by targeting their coordination. That moment was coming. Dylan Hunt knew it. Every tactical instinct honed across 3 centuries of warfare told him the Empire's patience was reaching its limit. Soon, the Alliance would face its greatest test, not individual battles against isolated Imperial forces, but a coordinated assault designed to prove that resistance, no matter how principled or distributed, ultimately failed against sufficient force. The question wasn't whether that assault was coming. The question was whether 6 months of building networks, establishing mutual support, and inspiring hope across the galaxy would be enough to survive what followed. The Andromeda Ascendant remained the Alliance's most powerful asset, a Commonwealth warship that could defeat Imperial fleets, protect civilian populations, and demonstrate that technological superiority could be married to principled resistance. But even the Andromeda couldn't be everywhere simultaneously. Even Dylan's tactical brilliance had limits. Even hope required more than symbolic victories to sustain itself against systematic oppression. The Rebel Alliance had proven resistance was possible. Now it would discover whether resistance was sustainable. The battle for Caamas had saved 2 billion lives and inspired a movement. The propaganda war had reframed resistance as principled choice rather than reckless rebellion. The 6 months of growth had transformed scattered cells into a coordinated network. But the real war, the one that would determine whether the Rebel Alliance survived to challenge the Empire's grip on the galaxy, was still ahead. And when that war came, the galaxy would learn whether a ship from another universe, a network of allied systems, and the unwavering belief that freedom was worth any cost could stand against an empire that had conquered a galaxy through patience, ruthlessness, and the calculated exploitation of every weakness hope created. The Force had brought balance in an unexpected way, by introducing a variable even the Sith Lord hadn't planned for. The wound between universes remained open, a reminder that reality was larger and stranger than anyone imagined. And through that wound, the system's Commonwealth's principles had entered a galaxy desperately in need of proof that tyranny could be opposed. Whatever came next, the Andromeda Ascendant would face it. The Rebel Alliance would stand together. And the hope they'd built over 6 impossible months would either prove strong enough to change the galaxy forever, or become a cautionary tale about the cost of opposing an empire that had patience measured in decades and cruelty refined over millennia. The war was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning.